Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something warm, dense and more than a little sweaty. The world of a Victorian bakery. That's right, you in your cosy socks and well-hydrated modern body are about to be dropped straight into 1800s London, into the cracked leather shoes of a flour-dusted apprentice baker. Fair warning, you probably won't survive this. You'll wake up too early, inhale things that should never go in your lungs, and probably burn off your fingerprints in the name of artisan bread. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I want to know, what city are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? I read every single one of your comments, even the unhinged ones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are wrenched from your straw-filled mattress by a clanging bell at precisely 3 km. It's not so much a bell as it is a hammered horseshoe tied to the rafters, whacked by your master baker's oldest son who hates you. There's no good morning, no coffee, no gentle sunrise. There's fog, your own breath clouding in the dark, and the thick smell of coal smoke that's been drifting into your tiny room since midnight. You swing your legs down, boots stiff from yesterday's sweat. Your back aches in ways that don't feel poetic. You slept fully clothed again, because there's no time to dress in the morning and your room has no real insulation anyway. Cold is a fact, hunger is another. You gnaw on the end of a biscuit you pocketed yesterday, hoping the mice didn't beat you to it. Downstairs, the bakery is pitch black except for the oven's dying embers. Your first task, before even touching any dough, is to get that beast blazing. You load it with coal from a bin that smells like wet dog and burnt newspaper. Then come the split logs, which have to be stacked just so there's a strange artistry to it. A ritual dance you've watched your master perform with eyes half closed. You're not there yet. You light it badly. The flame hesitates, sputters, and finally roars, sending a blast of heat into your face that singes your eyelashes. The oven, a giant iron-mouthed dragon, needs hours to heat. While it does, you sweep the stone floor, scattering rats in every direction. They squeak like tiny ghosts. It's not even 4 km, and you've already ruined your shoulders and possibly gotten the plague. You're not alone. The journeyman baker is here too, a twitchy man who's been working here for a decade but still lives in the same cot behind the grain sacks. He doesn't speak much. When he does, it's to mumble things like, "Mind the crusts, they speak." You give him a wide berth. As the oven settles into a slow, angry glow, you begin prepping the dough. This involves massive sacks of flour hoisted onto your back and dumped into wooden troughs the size of bathtubs. One sack nearly topples you, and the flour clouds rise like a dry snowstorm clinging to your eyelashes, coating your tongue. It's in your nose, your ears, even between your toes somehow. Your body becomes a part of the bakery's landscape, powdered and anonymous. Mixing is done by hand, and that means plunging your arms into the cool, slightly sticky mess and folding, pressing and grinding it into submission. No stand mixers here, just your sore forearms and the weight of 10 loaves worth of resistance. The water you add is lukewarm, carried in buckets from a pump outside and smells faintly metallic. You mix until the dough sighs against your fingers, finely pliable. It's a living thing now, and you've just given it life in the middle of the night. By 5 km, the master baker arrives. He doesn't say hello, he just pokes a finger into the dough and nods. That's it. No good job, no smile, just a quick nod and a grunt, and you feel oddly proud. Validation is rationed in this world like sugar. Here's a weird fact. Victorian bakers often use something called barm as a leavening agent. It's a frothy byproduct of beer brewing. Yours comes in a clay jug, sour-smelling and slightly fizzy, and you mix it into the dough while pretending not to be revolted. It's a bit of old science and alchemy, this fermentation game. If it foams too little, your bread is dense as a brick. If it foams too much, the dough rises too fast and collapses like a deflated lung. You eye the jug like it's a mischievous pet. Outside, the street begins to stir with the clop-clop of hooves and distant calls from fishmongers and milkmaids. Your hands are already blistered, and the sweat under your shirt has turned your apron translucent. The air smells of yeast, coal smoke, and regret. Meanwhile, scholars are still arguing about the average life expectancy of tradesmen like you in the Victorian era. Some say it was mid-30s, others suggest closer to 50, if you weren't crushed under a bread cart or poisoned by your own flour. Nobody agrees, but everyone admits it wasn't great. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the soot-streaked mirror by the shop door. Your face is ghostly from the flour, lips cracked, eyes wide. Congratulations, you are now the bakery's newest shade, and it's still only the beginning of the day. By 5:15 a.m, the dough rests, but you don't. There's no such thing as downtime in a Victorian bakery. While the mixture begins to rise in its wooden trough like some strange yeasty tide, your job shifts to prepping the next stage, forming. You dust the wooden bench with more flour, not to keep things clean, but to stop the dough from sticking like an aggressive barnacle. Your hands are already chapped and raw from the cold, the handling, and the earlier coal loading session. There's no barm, just a wince and push through it. The dough is heavy, thicker than you expect. It's not modern artisan fluff. This is bread with density, meant to feed working-class bellies and survive 2-day train journeys without collapsing. You slice it with a wooden scraper and measure by feel alone. No digital scale, no measuring cups, no margin for error. Too small and your loaves get rejected. Too large and you're wasting precious ingredients. You roll and pat, twist and pinch, shaping dough into precise rounds and oblongs, building tray after tray of identical little soldiers. The room smells like sweat and fermentation. The scent is earthy. Not bad, but relentless. You start to feel like your pores are leaking yeast. The windows are too caked with soot to let in much light, but you can tell dawn is breaking. It spills across the stone floor in a grey smear. The oven's heat now radiates like a furnace, and the room has climbed to a mild inferno. Your shirt sticks to you in places you didn't know could sweat. Then comes a sound you've learned to dread, the cough of the master baker. You know what follows? Inspection. He lumbers over, tall hat tilted like a judge's wig, and begins eyeing the loaves you've shaped. He doesn't speak, just nods slightly at some, raises an eyebrow at others, and outright reforms one with a dramatic sigh. You've failed the symmetry test again. He doesn't yell. Yelling is for apprentices who are worth salvaging. You're in that awkward limbo where you're not quite disappointing enough to fire, but not worth investing too much time in either. Behind you, the journeyman mutters a low tisk, then starts cutting his own dough with a speed and rhythm that suggests dark magic. His loaves are flawless. His hands move with the muscle memory of someone who's done nothing else for 2 decades. You try to mimic it, but end up tearing a chunk mid-roll and getting a flick on the ear from the master. Yep. Flicked like a misbehaving cat. You resist the urge to retaliate with a roll of rye to the face. As the trays fill, you heave them toward the proving area. It's barely warmer than the rest of the room, but it's protected from drafts and rodents. The loaves will sit here for an hour, swelling into proper size. You do not get to sit. Next comes the second batch of dough, a whole new round. Same steps, same lifting, mixing and praying. Your proportions don't offend the invisible gods of gluten. This time you're handling brown bread, rougher, grainier and cheaper than the pale white loaves. These are for the labourers, the chimney sweeps and factory workers who can't afford a posh loaf. You notice something odd as you shape the batch. This dough is drier. You sniff. It smells fine, but it's off somehow. Too firm, too crumbly. You shoot a look to the journeyman who shrugs. Later you find out the flour was cut with beans and chalk powder to stretch it out. It's not illegal, yet, but it's definitely shady, and it doesn't sit right with you. The truth is, bread adulteration is a quiet epidemic in your era. Bakers, even the good ones, attempted to mix in ground rice, plaster dust and alum, a white chemical powder that makes loaves look prettier, but could also eat away at your stomach lining. It's not talked about much, but it's happening all around you. You glance at the flour sack again and wonder how much of your job is baking, and how much is low-key poisoning. You get no time to linger on that thought, though, because the master suddenly snaps his fingers. Oven time. You've got 5 minutes to load the trays before the heat is wasted and everything gets thrown off schedule. The oven's mouth yawns open like a brick-red gateway to hell. You grab the long wooden peel, one of the only tools you trust, and slide the loaves in one by one, timing the movement just right so they land evenly without slapping into each other or the hot walls. It's like playing high-stakes pizza Tetris, except the pizza could burn your face off and there are no extra lives. The door slams shut with a puff of soot that nearly blinds you. You step back, sweating like a guilty Victorian politician, and wipe your brow with a flowery sleeve. The master doesn't speak, just gives you the smallest nod again, barely perceptible. You count it as a win. Here's a quirky bit of trivia. Many Victorian bakers believed that the mood of the baker affected the quality of the bread. Angry or impatient, the loaves would come out lumpy or sour, which makes you wonder how any of your loaves are even edible. You're one missed breakfast away from a full-on rage bake. And then the bell rings again, not for you, but for the scullery girl to bring more water from the pump. It reminds you that you haven't had a drink in hours, and the only thing near your lips is a layer of salt from your own face. Delicious! The scholarly debate of the day, whether or not bakery work was respectable labour. Some historians argue that it was noble, providing literal sustenance to the masses. Others insist it was back-breaking, soul-crushing work reserved for the socially immobile. Both are right. You're doing something that keeps people alive, and yet you're slowly breaking your body in the process. Still, there's something oddly satisfying about it. The loaves are baking now. You did that. You, with your cracked fingers and ghost flower skin. The smell wafting through the bakery is divine. Warm, nutty, slightly sweet. It fills your chest with pride. And maybe, just maybe, it'll distract you from the fact that it's only 700 am. The bread is in the oven, which means you get, well, not a break. That's not a thing here. But you do get a temporary shift in responsibility. And today it's cleaning the workspace before the master's wife comes in and declares it a pig's parlour again. She says it every morning, never fails. You take up the stiff-bristled broom and begin scraping flour, crumbs and a mysterious sticky blob from the flagstone floor. It's a little like shoveling snow with your bare hands, frustrating and deeply futile. You sweep around the feet of the journeyman baker, who grunts like a territorial cat but doesn't move. The master baker, your boss and constant source of fear, paces behind the counter now, waiting for the first loaves to crust over. He's in his early 40s but has the spine of a man twice his age, stooped, twisted and never still. You haven't figured out if that's from years of oven heat or simply the constant burden of running a business in a city where your storefront could be robbed, burned down or shut for health violations all before your lunch break. He barks your name and you freeze. Then he gestures to the back room with his thumb. You know what that means. Time to help grind grains. The large handmill sits in a cold, dim pantry next to sacks of barley, rye and oats. Flour is always needed, and despite the regular deliveries, this place still leans on old methods like the crank mill. You kneel, grab the heavy wooden handle, and begin the rotating motion that will, an hour later, gift you with maybe 5 cups of flour. The sound is dry and rhythmic like sandpaper against bone. It calms you a little, a meditative grind. As you crank, you hear footsteps behind you. It's the master. He doesn't speak, just stands there watching, arms crossed. His eyes scan your form, not in a caring way, more like a hawk judging the twitch of a mouse. Finally he speaks, his voice like boots on gravel. Loosen your elbow. You're wasting effort. He demonstrates, his own motion tighter, smoother. Then he leaves without a word. This you've come to understand is praise, or as close as it gets. Working under a Victorian master baker is not like having a mentor. It's more like living inside a living stress test. He expects perfection, endurance, obedience. He doesn't teach so much as allow you to learn while doing. If you fail, you're replaced. Simple. Your predecessor, a red-haired boy with a lisp, vanished midweek 1 month ago. No one talks about him. You assume he either quit or got turned into meat pie. Now here's your daily dose of Victorian trivia. Apprenticeships lasted 7 years. That's 7 years of rising before the sun, cooking in bakery heat and scrubbing things you didn't even know could get dirty. All without pay. You might get bored and occasional hand-me-downs from the master's son, but no money crosses into your hands until you've served your time. At best, it's a badge of dedication. At worst, it's indentured servitude with extra yeast. Back in the kitchen, the loaves are ready. You can smell it. That rich, deep-baked scent. Equal parts toast and something darker, earthier. You slide them out with the wooden peel, balancing each loaf like it's a newborn child. The crusts are golden and firm, some cracked open slightly on top in that satisfying way that says, yes, I rose just right. You line them up on a cooling rack, the steam rising like ghostly fingers. The master inspects them again. This time he touches one, then breaks it in half with his hands. He looks inside. Not at you, just inside the loaf. Then he nods once and walks away. You pretend not to swell with pride. Then the front bell rings. Your first customer, a wiry man in a frayed wool coat, hands blackened with coal dust. He buys 2 brown loaves and asks if there's any yesterday's white bread going cheap. The master's wife handles the front, but you listen carefully. That exchange, that bargaining, those few pence changing hands, is what all this back-breaking work hinges on. The sale. In the back, you're suddenly given a terrifying new task. Make the next round of dough unsupervised. The master and journeyman are both now dealing with deliveries and paperwork. You're on your own. You hesitate in front of the flour sack. The scoop in your hand feels heavier than usual. You measure by memory, by feel, by hope. Water, yeast, salt. You remember to add the barm, this time watching the foam with suspicion. It's fizzier than before. Too active? Is that a problem? Probably. Maybe. You mix anyway, plunging your arms into the mess and working it with all the strength your aching limbs can muster. This is where you realise dough has moods. It pushes back sometimes. Other times it just collapses. Today it's feisty. It resists your mixing like a toddler resisting bedtime. After 20 minutes of struggle, you shape it into loaves and set it to rest, praying again to whatever minor bread deity might exist. It occurs to you that you haven't sat down in over 4 hours. Your legs feel like logs. Your fingers are cracked. One has a blister now bursting just as you washed your hands in a bucket out back. You don't even flinch. The pain is expected now, just part of the costume. Here's a strange debate for you. Some scholars argue that the Victorian bakery was one of the earliest laboratory environments in culinary history. The baker's precision, timing, and relationship with live cultures, yeast, fermentation, made him more scientist than cook. Others scoff, saying bakers were more like glorified labourers with aprons. But you're standing here, elbow deep in rising dough, lungs full of flour, mind full of ratios, and you're starting to think the scientists might be on something. As the dough rises in the proving trays, you lean on the table for a moment. Just a moment. Your eyes blur, your head dips. Just as you begin to drift into a dangerous micronap, a ladle clangs against the stove. The master's son stands at the back door holding the breakfast pot. It's thin gruel with a lump of yesterday's bread floating in it like a bloated sponge. You slurp it down in 3 mouthfuls, feeling the warmth in your stomach like a candle in the cave. And then, it's time to begin again. It's barely mid-morning and already you've worked a full day by modern standards. But in a Victorian bakery, you're not even halfway through. You finish gulping your meagre breakfast, if you can call lukewarm gruel and soggy crusts breakfast, just in time to hear your name shouted from the stairwell. The master's voice, low and coarse, echoes off the stone like a judge passing sentence. Upstairs, scrub the ash room. You groan inwardly but don't argue. Apprentices don't argue. You don't even respond out loud, you just go. The ash room isn't some exotic Victorian oddity, it's exactly what it sounds like. A tiny upper chamber where coal dust, oven soot, and char from the fireboxes settle, thicken, and gather like a funeral shroud. It clogs the windows, it cakes your hands, and it must be cleaned weekly, lest it spread down through the ventilation and drop soot into the dough. You climb the narrow staircase with a bucket and a rag, legs trembling slightly. The smell hits you first, burnt wood, oily coal, and something damp, maybe mould. You reach the top, crouch, and begin scrubbing. Ash sticks to your damp rag like powdered tar. You sneeze 3 times, then give up and tie a flour sack over your nose. It doesn't help. You still inhale enough soot to turn your spit grey. By the time you're halfway done, you're sweating again, but the sweat now leaves trails down your arms like ink on a foggy window. This is what apprentices do. You're not just here to learn baking, you're here to do everything. Scrub, chop, fetch, clean, carry, sort deliveries, prep ingredients, stoke the oven, and absorb the blame for anything that goes remotely sideways. The journeyman doesn't speak to you unless he's correcting something. The master's son openly mocks you. The master himself treats you like a mildly intelligent goat. And yet you stay, because you want to learn the trade, or maybe just because you don't know where else to go. Historically, apprentices were often orphans, second sons, or children from large families with too many mouths to feed. You were either taken in by a craftsman, or more accurately traded away by your parents for the promise of room and board. Your contract might have been signed in ink, sealed with wax, and witnessed by local officials, but to you it might as well have been signed in blood. It's a binding agreement. You're here until you're 18, unless the bakery burns down or you die first, and the odds of either happening aren't 0. As you finish scrubbing, you look around and realise you're covered in soot. There's no mirror, but one glance at your hands is enough. They look like they belong to a chimney sweep. You descend the stairs carefully. Now boy, trying not to leave footprints on the steps, but there's no point. You trail ash like breadcrumbs. Back downstairs, the bakery's full of sound now. The front bell keeps ringing, customers shuffling in for their daily loaves, coins clinking on the counter. The master's wife barks orders while balancing a ledger on her arm. She doesn't look up when you return to the kitchen, just points to the back where flour sacks need moving before the afternoon delivery. You sigh, crack your knuckles, and prepare to lift. Each sack is nearly as heavy as you are, sometimes 50, even 60 pounds, stuffed tight with wheat flour that settles and shifts like damp sand. You haul one over your shoulder, knees shaking, and drag it to the back wall. The floor there is never dry. Your boots slosh slightly in the corner puddle that's been growing for days. Here's something you weren't warned about before starting this job. Flour mites. Little things, nearly invisible, that live in the sacks and skitter out when disturbed. You see a few now, tiny, fast, too small to squash. You ignore them, everyone does. Out of sight, out of bakery regulations, probably crawling on your clothes by now, you resist the urge to scratch your scalp. After the sacks are stacked, you return to the bench just in time to join the shaping of the next round of loaves. This time they're cottage loaves. An old-fashioned double-decker design, where a small round sits atop a larger one like a flowery snowman. They look whimsical, but making them is anything but. The top ball has to be centered perfectly or the loaf bakes lopsided, and the steam has to vent just right or you'll end up with a crust explosion. You mess up the first 3 before the journeyman sighs, takes over your station, and sends you to help in the scullery. The scullery is even worse. It's where dishes, mixing tools, and the endless metal trays are cleaned. There's no hot running water, just a large pot on the stove that must be boiled, then ladled into the washing bin. You do this while steam blinds you, and your hands soak in water so hot it turns your skin blotchy. You scrub trays that have already been scrubbed once, but not to the master's wife's satisfaction. Her voice rings from the doorway. You missed a corner. You look. It's a speck the size of a flea. You clean it again. One of the younger helpers, a boy no older than 9, works beside you. He doesn't speak, just scrubs with vicious speed, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. His sleeves are too short, his hands red and raw. He finishes a whole stack of trays while you're still working on one. When he finally speaks, it's only to say, "Too slow." You want to reply with something sharp, but he's already turned away carrying his stack with the poise of a disgruntled grandparent. You wonder how long he's been here. Probably longer than you. Maybe forever. This was common in Victorian bakeries. Child labour wasn't just allowed. It was standard. Children as young as 6 or 7 worked long hours, often more than 12 a day, for little or no pay. Some apprentices were just orphans placed there by the parish workhouse. No one questioned it. Cheap hands were good hands. By the time you return to the kitchen, your skin is wrinkled from water, and your lower back is one bad lift away from surrender. But the loaves are rising again, and the journeyman grudgingly lets you help with scoring the delicate cuts on top that let steam escape and control how the bread blooms in the oven. You take the razor and slice carefully, fingers shaking. 1 slash too deep and the loaf collapses. Too shallow, and it bursts sideways in the oven. You botch the first. The master sees, sighs, and finishes the job with a flourish that takes exactly 1 second. You envy that skill, that casual precision, but also you hate him a little for it. You keep going, loaf after loaf, tray after tray. There's no clock here, only the oven's heat and the ever-growing pain in your feet. You've been on them for nearly 10 hours, and there's still hours more to come. There's a rhythm to this place now. You're not sure if it's comforting or just hypnotic, something between a lullaby and a factory whistle. The air hums with motion. The oven doors creak open and shut like tired lungs. The wooden table thuds with every dough slap, feet shuffle, voices grumble, pans clang. Somewhere in this mechanical ballet you've started to disappear. You're not a person anymore. You're part of the bakery, a moving part, flour-coated and fading at the edges. Today's batch of bread includes something a bit fancier than the usual bricks of sustenance. Milk rolls. You're told to help prep them. They're small, pale, and slightly sweet. Soft enough that rich customers like to slice them thin and smear them with jam and butter. They probably didn't churn themselves. You don't get to make the milk mixture, of course. That's left to the journeyman, who treats the pot of warming milk and butter like it's the royal crown jewels. Your job is to stir without scalding it, and if you do, you'll be scalded yourself. Maybe not literally, But emotionally? Absolutely. Once the milk mixture cools and is added to the flour, the dough turns sticky and soft. These rolls feel more alive than the coarse brown loaves. They rise faster, stretch easier, and are somehow more temperamental. You portion them by hand, little blobs of hope, and set them in neat rows on a greased tray. The grease is lard smeared by a rag that looks suspiciously like a former shirt sleeve. As you work, the master begins quizzing you, not kindly and not in full sentences. "Hydration level," he barks. You stammer, unsure. "Why, softer crust," he snaps. You guess. "More fat?" He grunts, which might be approval. Or just a chronic breathing problem. Either way, you try to hold on to the information. It's rare when he teaches outright, and rarer still when he doesn't follow it with a lecture about your lazy wrists. By midday, you're beginning to understand just how central bread is to Victorian life. This isn't just food, it's infrastructure. It's the foundation of every meal, the difference between surviving and starving. Families buy a loaf in the morning, slice it throughout the day, and soak the last crust in broth by nightfall. Bread is breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and each type, white, brown, wholemeal, rye, signals exactly who you are and how much you earn. White bread is for the elite, not because it tastes better, but because it's refined. The flour's been sifted and sieved until it's pure, pale, and basically nutritionless. The cost is higher, and so is the prestige. If you're rich, you don't want your bread full of bits. Bits mean labour, countryside, work. Bits are for the poor. That's where brown bread comes in, chewy, heavy, full of bran and grain, the kind that sticks to your ribs and stays there like an edible reminder that you were born to toil. Somewhere in between is the Coburg, a round, crusty loaf named for Prince Albert. It's got enough flair to look respectable, but not so much that it seems indulgent. You make a few of those today, rolling and tucking the dough, scoring it with a square cut on top to create that signature bloom. As they rise, you feel a tiny flicker of satisfaction. You made these. They are not perfect, but they're symmetrical, and that's something. Let's take a historical detour for a second. Victorian bread was subject to actual regulation. The 1822 Bread Act tried to standardise what could be called bread, but the truth was, bakers often skirted the rules. Some customers even preferred adulterated bread because it was whiter, lighter, and longer lasting. The line between purity and poison was thin and blurry. In fact, chalk and alum was so common that doctors started noticing mysterious digestive problems in working-class districts and quietly blamed the bread. You think about this as you slice into a fresh loaf for the bakery's daily samples. The inside is warm, soft, and slightly sweet. You taste it, just a sliver. It's good, really good. But you also wonder as you chew how many times this exact kind of slice has sickened someone elsewhere. Out front, the bakery bustles. A woman in a fine bonnet inspects the milk rolls with disdain, like she's considering adopting a problematic puppy. Beside her, a chimney sweep with soot on his cheeks buys yesterday's loaf with a copper coin that's bent in the middle. Neither of them notices you behind the curtain. You're invisible, unless you mess up. Then you're painfully visible. The day continues with biscuit prep. Not cookies, biscuits in the British sense. Hard, dry, barely sweet crackers that can last for weeks if stored correctly. You roll and stamp them with a hand press, each one bearing the bakery's initials. Some are flavoured with caraway, others with a bit of treacle if there's any left. You try one when no one's looking. It tastes like crunchy air with the memory of the sugar. But you'll take it. The quirky fact for today: in some parts of Victorian England, bakers were legally required to mark their bread with a special symbol or stamp. This was meant to prevent fraud and help identify whose loaf caused food poisoning. Your bakery uses a simple double C mark pressed into the bottom of every round loaf. You've started doing it yourself, carefully angling the stamp so it doesn't ruin the rise. Some historians argue that bread was more than food. It was morality. There were sermons preached about the honest loaf and pamphlets warning against dishonest bakers. It's ironic considering how often those same pamphlets ignored child labour or the hygiene issues in back kitchens like yours. But then again, hypocrisy isn't a modern invention. As the afternoon sun stretches across the soot-dimmed window panes, your body begins to rebel. Your hands throb. Your lower back feels like a brittle plank. You haven't sat in 12 hours. The air is hot and heavy with yeast and sweat, and you swear your eyelashes are clumping from the steam. You drink from the shared tin cup hanging by the back sink, water tasting faintly of iron and someone else's lips. You don't care. You're just trying not to collapse. Then, out of nowhere, the master tells you to prep your own tray of breadsticks. He tosses you a handful of scraps and says, "Do something with that." It's a test, or a trap, or both. You twist the scraps into rough sticks, brush them with lard, and sprinkle a few with coarse salt. They're ugly, uneven, and slightly burnt by the time they come out. But the journeyman bites one and raises an eyebrow. "Not bad," he mutters, which from him is basically a love letter. You allow yourself a crooked smile. There's a weird moment in every Victorian bakery shift where time doesn't exactly stop, it just loops. You can't remember if it's Tuesday or Thursday, if this is the third batch of dough or the fifth, or if that burn on your wrist is from today or a leftover scar. That moment hits you now, somewhere between scrubbing a butter-sticky bench and restacking a tray of pans that somehow just fell on their own. You blink, you breathe, you carry on. Today's headache involves yeast, specifically the lack of it. The barm jug, usually frothy and eager, is just sitting there, silent and flat like a sulking toad. You shake it gently, nothing, no bubbles, no fizz. The journeyman mutters a curse and pops the cork on another jug, but that one's gone sour, too ripe and dangerously acidic. You all exchange looks. Without live yeast or barm, there's no bread, and without bread, there's no bakery. It's a crisis, in the calmest, most flour-dusted way possible. Here's the quirky truth. Yeast in the Victorian era wasn't just something you bought in packets. Most bakers relied on barm, foam skimmed from beer brewing, or cultivated their own sourdough starters. Some even hoarded their mother sponge like a family heirloom, whispering about it like it was a secret pet. The bakery you work in doesn't have a beer connection, so when the barm goes bad, panic ripples through the kitchen. No foam, no rise, no loaves. The master sends you running, literally, to the neighbouring alehouse to ask for fresh barm. You fly out into the street, apron flapping, boots clapping against cobblestones. London air smacks you in the face like a wet glove. Coal smoke, horse dung, wet wool, and something metallic you hope isn't blood. You weave past carts, street criers, and a man selling what he claims are roasted rats, though they suspiciously resemble pigeons. The alehouse is dim and sticky. You beg the brewer for barm. He gives you a side-eye, scratches his beard, and finally agrees for a loaf of white bread in return. Deal. You grab the sloshing jug and run it back like it's a royal baby. Every jostle threatens disaster. You're pretty sure you're being followed by a stray dog now, interested more in your smell than your company. Back in the bakery, the master takes the jug with no thanks. He tests it, one sniff, one shake, and gives the nod. It's acceptable. The journeyman adds it to the sponge mixture, and within minutes, the dough begins to pulse and breathe again. Crisis averted. For now. It's moments like these that remind you Victorian baking was a weird mix of science, superstition, and blind luck. Some bakers swore their dough rose better during certain moon phases. Others believed a loaf would fail if someone argued in the kitchen while it was rising. There were rituals, crossing the dough with a knife to let the devil out, whispering prayers over the starter, even avoiding certain herbs or people deemed unlucky. You haven't gone that far, but after today's barm fiasco you might start muttering blessings over the mixing bowl. The dough gets divided, shaped and set to prove. You're tasked with kneading a new batch for tomorrow's sour loaves. More tang, more chew, fewer smiles. It's the kind of dough that sticks to your hands no matter how much flour you use. You knead for nearly 40 minutes, palms aching, arms sore, sweat sliding down your back and soaking into your waistband. When you stop, the dough sighs. You envy it. The master watches from the doorway. "Don't punch it. Talk to it," he says. You look up, confused. Is that a joke? No. He's serious. Gentle folds. It should stretch, not break. You try again, softer this time, less brute force, more coaxing. It works. The dough smooths out under your fingers like a sullen child finally convinced to nap. You're oddly proud and exhausted. Outside, the fog has crept back in. London's version of twilight, where the smog gets thicker instead of the sky getting darker. Light gas lamps flicker behind greasy glass, and you hear the clatter of hooves echo through narrow alleys. But inside it's bright and burning. The oven is fully stoked again, blasting waves of heat across the stone floor. You're told to start baking a batch of rye loaves. They smell sharper than the others, earthy, almost sour, with a hint of smoke. Rye is trickier than wheat. Less gluten, more risk. You score the tops carefully, like drawing lines in wet clay. There's a debate among modern historians about whether Victorian bakers were considered craftsmen or just glorified servants. Some argue their skill and intuition placed them in a class of artisans. Others claim they were treated no better than the coal shovelers out back. You look down at your blistered hands and think, probably both. You're learning a craft, yes, but you're also disposable. If you collapsed right now, the 9-year-old scullery boy would be handed your apron before your body hit the floor. Once the rye loaves are in, you help clean the bench. Again, there's never a point where the bench stays clean for more than 6 minutes. Crumbs, dough bits, grease, rogue raisins, it all reappears like magic. As you scrub, the master's wife calls out from the shop front, "Delivery's late." You know what that means, another run. You throw on your cloak, grab the delivery satchel and head out again, this time with 3 loaves for the tailor, 2 for the tobacconist and a bag of broken biscuits for the workhouse around the corner. It's cold now, properly cold. Your breath fogs out in front of you as you trot between flickering lamps and slow-moving wagons. People are heading home from factories, scarves pulled tight, shoulders hunched. You hear a woman cough so hard she bends double. A dog barks. Somewhere nearby, someone sings a low, warbling lullaby that might also be a warning. Deliveries aren't glamorous, but they give you space. Out here, your hands still ache, but your mind gets to wander. You think about your parents, about home, about the life you might have had if you hadn't been placed. You wonder if you'll ever get through your apprenticeship and own your own bakery. A small one, warm, quiet, with shelves that stay full and customers who say thank you. Back at the shop, the rye loaves are done. You open the oven with the peel and the smell hits you. Smoky, rich, almost spicy. You tap the bottoms, hollow sound, perfect. The master doesn't say a word, just slides one into his basket and starts slicing for samples. You allow yourself to exhale. Briefly, there's still pastry to prep and scones to shape, and the scullery girl just threw up in the corner from inhaling too much powdered sugar. But that's for the evening crew. For now, you wash your hands, wipe your face, and stare down at your reflection in the dark window glass. You don't recognize it anymore. And honestly, that might be for the best. The oven is a living thing, growling, hissing, breathing, hot and loud as any beast. By now, you've developed an instinct for its moods. There are moments it seems almost friendly, glowing, warm, like a hearth fire. But then there are days like today, when it feels hungry, angry, spiteful. The iron door creaks open with a reluctant moan, and the blast of heat that surges out nearly melts your eyebrows clean off. You step back, shielding your face with a tray, already sweating again even though you've barely started your shift. Coal-fired ovens don't run on consistency, they run on chaos. One minute they're underbaking loaves, and the next they're incinerating your batch of milk rolls to charcoal crisps. The heat distribution is completely uneven, scorching at the back, lukewarm up front, with hidden hotspots that no one can predict. You're supposed to feel where the bread should go, like a baker whisperer. You try, carefully easing the peel in and rotating the loaves every few minutes, but the heat singes your forearms with every attempt. By the time you slide the last tray in, your hands are red, raw and tingling. That tingling doesn't fade, not with water, not with wiping them down on your apron. You examine one palm and realize you've caught a minor burn across the heel, bright pink and already puffing slightly. You wince, but there's no time for sympathy, definitely no salve. The best you can hope for is a splash of cold pump water and maybe some flour rubbed over it like a primitive poultice. You do both, then get back to the oven because the dough won't bake itself, and the journeyman's already yelling about the scones sagging on the prep bench. It's on 20 degrees in the kitchen, easy. The heat clings to you, wraps around your ribs and seeps into your scalp. Your shirt, already damp, is now fully soaked through, and your apron hangs heavy with sweat. You envy the loaves. They're allowed to sit still and slowly rise while you're running trays like a coal miner with a pastry problem. You catch a glimpse of the scullery boy near the wash bucket, his face beet red, eyes dazed. He might pass out. You might too. There's no ventilation, just one cracked window that opens onto an alley full of meat drippings and dead pigeons. You pause for a breath near the back door, but the breeze is worse. It's a thick, muggy slap to the lungs, full of soot and smoke from chimneys all up and down the street. London doesn't smell like a city. It smells like a dying campfire, and you're inside its furnace, hands burned, lips cracked, brain-fogged. Back inside, the journeyman is rearranging the trays you just set, muttering something about, "Even spacing, boy. Are you blind?" You're not. You're just overheating. You nod, rearrange again, and ignore the throbbing in your palms. You don't even flinch anymore when the oven door brushes your hip. Your apron already has 2 burn holes from earlier this week. Here's a curious fact. There were no regulations about bakeries being unbearably hot. No health standards, no temperature limits, no take a break and hydrate posters. In the summer, bakers collapsed from heat stroke so frequently that some shops kept a bucket of vinegar water just to revive them. Yours does not. You get lukewarm pump water and an eye roll if you dare complain, and still you keep going. You open the oven again. This time the loaf crusts have cracked beautifully, golden, puffed, and splintered just right. A small victory. You retrieve the trays with the long-handled peel moving carefully, trying not to tilt or bump. One slip and you lose a whole tray of bread to the filthy stone floor. You've seen it happen. No one gets forgiven for a dropped tray. As you line the loaves on the cooling rack, your body gives you a warning sign. Just a little stagger, a half-second of dizziness that passes as quickly as it came. But you take the hint. You lean against the flour bin and take a few deep breaths. The air you suck in is full of chalky flour dust and coal smoke, but it's air all the same. You swallow hard. No fainting, not here. This moment brings up one of the stranger debates among scholars. How aware were Victorian bakers of the long-term damage this kind of heat exposure did? Some argue they knew full well and simply accepted it as a cost of the trade. Others believe it wasn't even considered, just one more burden in a society that didn't exactly prioritise worker safety. Either way, the truth is simple. Every year in a bakery like this shaved a little more off your body. You just didn't think about it until your joints locked up or your hands stopped healing. The rest of the team moves slower now too. The journeyman rolls his shoulders and takes more frequent water breaks. Even the master has retreated to the cooler front room under the excuse of balancing accounts. You suspect he just doesn't want to bake in this inferno any longer than necessary. That leaves you to manage the afternoon pastry prep. Puff pastry to be specific, which, in this heat, is basically impossible. The butter melts as soon as you touch it. You roll it once, fold it, and already the layers are collapsing. You flour the board again, curse softly, and try another fold. The result is a sticky, slippery mess that will bake up more like a biscuit than a flaky tart. Still you soldier on. You are asked to make 6, and 6 you will make. They just might look like they were stepped on first. Here's a weird detail from the fringe. Some bakers swore that working near the oven for long enough changed your sense of smell permanently. That the heat and yeast created a sort of bread nose, able to detect underbaking or overproofing like a sixth sense. You're not sure if that's a myth, but you're definitely starting to smell things others don't. Dough that's just starting to sour. Crust that's seconds from burning. Butter that's past its prime. You pull the pastry tray from the oven 20 minutes later. It's a mess. Flat, pale, and steaming, but edible. The scullery girl eats one without asking. The journeyman eyes the tray but says nothing. You consider that a passing grade. As evening creeps in, the temperature finally drops by a few degrees. The fire still rages, but outside the sky earns a dull lavender grey, and the gas lamps begin to flicker on. Customers slow to a trickle. The master returns to inspect the day's totals, frowning over the ledger like it personally insulted him. You avoid his gaze and continue scraping burnt bits from the baking sheets, even though you can barely hold the scraper anymore. Your feet are swollen, your skin is stiff with flour, your apron crackles when you move. You've sweated out every drop of water your body had to spare. And now you're just operating on muscle memory and stubbornness. The heat has taken everything from you but the will to keep going. And that, apparently, is enough. You've started to notice something odd about bread, something that doesn't get talked about much. It divides people, not just along class lines, but in tone, in temperament, in how they walk into the bakery and ask for it. You see it more clearly now after weeks of handling every type of flour-covered request. White loaves are demanded with stiff formality, brown loaves are asked for like they're a necessity, and rye is quietly requested by people who don't make eye contact. It's bread, sure, but it's also a social signal. The crust says who you are. This afternoon you find yourself restocking shelves in the front of the shop, wiping crumbs off the wooden counter and lining up the loaves in neat rows. There's a ritual to it. White bread on the left, brown in the centre, specialty loaves like rye and Coburg to the right. Pastries and milk rolls stay under the glass dome unless requested. You're not allowed to ring the till or handle the money, but you are expected to know where everything goes, and to keep your mouth shut unless someone asks a direct question. The door creaks open, and a middle-aged woman steps in, lace gloves and pinched lips. She glances at you, then immediately looks away, addressing her request to the master's wife, who's perched on her usual stool near the ledger. "A fourpenny white," she says. "Not please, never please." The white loaf is a symbol. It's not about taste, it's about distance, clean, refined, filtered through a dozen sieves until it's as pale as powdered chalk. Expensive too. White bread is what people who don't bake at home buy to remind everyone that they don't need to. You watch as the transaction plays out. A careful handoff, gloved fingers never touching the crust. Coins clink. The door swings shut behind her like a punctuation mark. A moment later, a man enters. Wool coat, smudged hands, a quiet voice. "Brown loaf," he says. "Simple, no frills." The master's wife passes it to him wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. The contrast is brutal, but it's normal. Expected. Victorian Britain is obsessed with classification, of people, of status, and yes, of bread. Brown bread is nutritious, dense, rougher around the edges, and that's exactly how its buyers are seen. It's made from wholemeal flour, more affordable, more filling. It's what you sell to dock workers, chimney sweeps, laundresses. The kind of bread you slice thick and dip in broth. You think about the dough as you shaped it earlier, how it resisted your hands, how it cracked just a little around the edges, like the people who eat it. You remember something the journeyman said once, half under his breath? "Every crust tells a story, but white crusts lie." You didn't ask what he meant. You just nodded. You get it now. One of your tasks today is to measure out the day's flour stock for tomorrow's loaves. You head to the storage cellar, ducking beneath low beams, lantern in hand. The bags of flour are stacked high and heavy, labelled in chalk with the mill's initials. The white flour is the most precious, kept higher up, stored away from moisture and pests. The brown and rye flours are in open sacks, closer to the floor, still used, still necessary, but treated with less reverence. You scoop carefully, noting the texture. White flour is soft, fine, smooth like dust. Brown flour is gritty, heavier, dotted with tiny flakes of bran. You weigh them by feel, transferring them into smaller buckets and labelling each one with a scrap of wax paper and a pencil scribble. You're learning slowly. The master doesn't tell you you're improving, but he hasn't shouted at you in 3 days. That's something. A rat scurries past your boot and you don't even flinch. You just shift the bucket, make sure the lids are tight, and climb back upstairs, lantern swinging by your side. Here's a quirky truth. In some parts of England, poor families would actually mix bread crusts into soup to stretch it farther, using it as a thickener, a filler, and sometimes as the main ingredient. Bread wasn't just a food, it was a tool, a survival mechanism. You've even heard of entire meals made from stale loaves soaked in beer and milk, then baked again into something vaguely edible. Rich people called it pudding. Poor people just called it dinner. You return to the bakery floor just in time to catch the tail end of an argument between the master's wife and a customer. Something about the price of a white loaf going up by a halfpenny. The woman is livid. She storms out, muttering that she'll take her business to the grocer instead. The master's wife doesn't blink. "Let her," she says, more to herself than anyone else. You wonder how many more customers they can afford to lose like that. Probably not many. There's another wrinkle to all this. The ongoing debate among historians about whether bread served to uphold the class system or quietly subvert it. Some say it reinforced hierarchy, white for the rich, brown for the poor, clear, visible markers of who belonged where. Others argue that it quietly revealed the illusion, because the richest bread was also the least nutritious, the most adulterated. The poor with their dark, dense loaves were ironically eating better, just without realizing it. You don't know where you fall in that debate. You just know that the loaves you make shape the lives of people you never meet. That someone will toast this bread for breakfast tomorrow, dip it in stew tonight, wrap it in cloth to keep it soft for the weekend. You may never know their names, but they're eating your work. It's strange, and a little satisfying. Later in the afternoon, the journeyman shows you how to prep loaves for a travelling merchant. Special order, 6 brown, 4 rye, 3 wholemeal, all to be wrapped in cloth and tied with twine. You work silently beside him, mirroring his folds and knots. He doesn't correct you. That's new. He even hands you the knife to trim the cloth yourself. You take the opportunity and try not to shake. Before he ties the final knot, he pauses, looks at the stack of loaves and says quietly, "Never forget. This is food, but it's also message. Every bite tells people who they are." You nod, not just to show you understand, but because it's true. It's not just crust and crumb, it's a mirror. As the sun slips lower and the gaslight flickers yellow across the loaves, the bakery begins to slow. But the truth is, bread never really sleeps, not here. You're already thinking ahead to tomorrow's batch, how much flour you'll need, if the barm will be ready, what shape you'll try again and fail slightly less at. Bread doesn't just feed, it speaks, and whether you're shaping white loaves or kneading brown dough into rough rounds, you're learning to speak its language. There's a phrase that floats around the bakery like a stale crumb. Make it stretch. It comes from the master's wife or the journeyman, or sometimes the voice in your own head. Always about ingredients, flour, large sugar, but also about everything else, time, energy, sanity. And nowhere does that phrase carry more weight than when the flour starts running low and you're told quietly but firmly to make it stretch in ways that don't involve magic. It's a slippery slope, and today you start to slide. You're in the cellar again, measuring out the next day's flour allotment. The barrel of white flour is nearly scraped clean, just a thin coating clinging to the bottom like old paint. The brown flour's holding on, but not by much, and the rye is clumpy, too moist, slightly sour smelling. You mention it to the journeyman. He grunts and tells you to dry it out in the oven corners. You know better than to argue. The master calls you up to the mixing bench where he's already weighing ingredients. He's not using the usual proportions. There's a small paper sack beside the flour bin, and you recognize it immediately. Whitening powder. Not flour, not grain, just chalk. Ground calcium carbonate. You've seen it before, in the corners of the pantry, where the rats don't even sniff. Now it's going into dough. You try not to stare. He notices. "It helps the crust," he says flatly, as though the conversation is over. Keeps the loaf firm, adds bulk. You nod slowly, pretending to understand, but you know what this is. Adulteration. Padding the flour with something cheap and inert so you can make 10 loaves instead of 8. It's not poison, probably, but it's not fake food either. Still, you don't protest. You're just the apprentice. You mix. As your hands knead the dough, the texture feels off. Drier, grittier, less elastic. You add more water and pretend it's fine. You're not the only one doing it, of course. London is full of bakers cutting corners. Chalk, rice flour, bean powder, even plaster dust if they're desperate or vile enough. Alum is the real favourite. It keeps white bread looking pristine and smooth, even if it eats away at your insides over time. You haven't seen it here yet, but you wouldn't be surprised if it's somewhere in the back, tucked behind a sack of salt. You shape the adulterated loaves carefully, hoping the master doesn't ask you to eat one. You don't want to find out how digestible calcium carbonate really is. Historically, this practice became such a scandal that entire parliamentary committees were formed to investigate it. Food adulteration was so widespread that even the most respected bakers were guilty, some openly, others with a wink and a nod. In 1855, a report revealed that London's bread was laced with enough of chalk and alum to kill a small horse over time. You don't have a horse handy, but you are starting to get headaches. Coincidence? Back at the oven, the journeyman loads the trays while you prep the next batch of sponge. This time you're told to stretch the yeast too, less barm, more time. "Let it sit longer," he says, "and the bubbles will catch up." You nod again. It's not a lie. It will rise, eventually, but the flavour will change. The crust might crack wrong, the crumb will feel thin, airy in a way that betrays its poverty. While the loaves bake, you help the scullery boy with biscuit scraps, grinding the leftovers into powder for something called bread meal. It's basically flour made from stale bread. It'll be added into tomorrow's dough as filler. You ask if it's common. He shrugs. Better than sawdust. Which is not an exaggeration. You once heard a delivery boy mention a bakery near Clerkenwell that actually used powdered bark. Bread that could give you splinters, Victorian innovation at its darkest. By noon, the adulterated batch is on the shelf. It looks normal, golden, crusty, maybe a bit lighter than usual, but unless you bite into it, you'd never know it had been doctored. Customers don't suspect. The lady in the lace gloves buys a white loaf and praises the consistency. A dock worker buys a brown round and doesn't even look at it before wrapping it under his coat. And that's the thing, you realise most people don't care what's in their bread. They care that it's cheap, warm, and fills their stomach. They trust the crust. That's what makes this kind of cheating so easy and so tempting. You're asked to sweep up, and as you bend over, your spine creaks like an old door. Your fingers are coated in flour. But now you wonder if that flour even counts as food anymore. You brush it off, move to the front, and start cleaning the window. Outside, the street is packed. Vendors, factory workers, children barefoot in the gutter. You see a beggar chew something wrapped in powder, and for a moment, you're terrified it's one of your loaves. You hope not, you really do. In the back, the master is muttering to himself, calculating. The price of flour is up again. There's talk of another poor harvest. He's considering cutting costs further, asking you to mix the dough lighter tomorrow. That means more water, less substance, more lies. There's a scholarly argument about this, of course. Some say Victorian adulteration was pure capitalism, a cold, logical response to supply and demand. Others argue that it was a moral failure, a betrayal of the public trust. You think it's both. You understand the desperation. But it doesn't sit right. Not in your gut, not in your hands. As evening creeps in, you're tasked with cleaning the mixing trough. It's sticky with residue, flour, chalk, a few flecks of dried yeast. You scrub hard, but it doesn't come clean. It never does. Some things just sink in. The journeyman watches you from the doorway, arms folded. He doesn't speak, but his silence is heavier than any scolding. You wonder if he ever questioned it. If he remembers a time when every loaf was just flour, water, yeast, and salt. Maybe he's forgotten, or maybe remembering hurts too much. As you wring out your cloth, your burned hands ache. Your knuckles are red, your arms trembling from a day of lifting, kneading, running. You haven't eaten since dawn. Your only comfort is the warmth from the oven and the dull thud of loaves being stacked for tomorrow's shelf. You wonder what you'll bake tomorrow, what you'll cut, what corners will give way next. And you wonder, if it came down to it, what you would put in the bread to keep the bakery alive. You don't trust the flyers at first. They show up one morning, tucked under the bakery door, printed on flimsy paper with smug little flourishes around the edges. "The finest crust in all of Clerkenwell," it crows, in bold typeface that's too modern for its own good. Below that, a gaunt-looking French baguette sketched in ink, standing at a slant like it's about to start a conversation you're not invited to. You read it again, then a third time. Something about the tone makes your scalp itch. The journeyman reads it once and tosses it in the fire. "Competition," he mutters, voice flat. "Knew they'd come sooner or later." By midday you've heard enough. Word spreads fast, even without headlines or telegrams. There's a new bakery 3 blocks over, cleaner, brighter, cheaper, and worse, they've got a display window. A real one, with curved glass and a little gold lettering that practically glows when the sun hits it. People are already calling it the shiny one. It's like a circus tent for bread, and you're not sure whether to be insulted or curious. The master takes it worse than anyone. He doesn't say much, just sharpens his knives with a look in his eye like he's ready to gut a loaf bare-handed. You don't ask questions, but you notice he's suddenly more particular about presentation. The loaves are stacked neater. The scoring gets fancier. You're told to wipe down the front counter 3 times instead of 1, and for the first time in weeks, the window gets properly cleaned, not by you, but by the master himself, sweating through his apron and muttering about French nonsense. You decide to investigate. Not officially, of course. But one morning, while out delivering a stale Coburg to the butcher, you make a little detour. You find the new shop easily. It gleams, literally. The outside bricks have been scrubbed down, the awning is a deep navy with embroidered trim, and there are plants in the window. Inside, trays of glossy croissants and sugared buns sit behind crystal-clear glass like museum pieces. The floor is tiled. Your boots leave a muddy imprint the moment you step in. Behind the counter stands a man in a starched apron, smiling like he's just invented cake. He greets you in French-accented English, offers a sample of brioche. You take it. It's light, fluffy, sweet enough to make your molars hum. It's also a complete betrayal of everything your bakery stands for. Simple, hearty, functional bread for functional people. This is dessert wearing a crown. You return to your bakery with a belly full of brioche and a heart full of dread. The master sees your face when you walk in and doesn't even need to ask. "Pretty, was it?" he grunts. You nod slowly. He doesn't respond, just goes back to shaping dough, knuckles whitening with each fold. Here's a historical twist for you. This isn't new. Victorian London saw bakery after bakery compete in what basically became an arms race of refinement. By the 1870s, it wasn't enough to make bread that fed families. You had to make bread that seduced them, decorative scoring, exotic ingredients, even food dye to make the crusts pop. You hear rumours the new bakery uses cardamom in their buns. Cardamom. You're still mixing sugar with leftover treacle and hoping no one notices. Soon the effects begin to show. Your usual morning customers trickle in slower. Some don't come at all. The lace glove lady now visits once a week instead of every other day. You overhear someone say she was seen buying a French roll. The master's wife pretends not to care, but her ledger scribbles get more frantic and the scullery girl's pay gets cut by half a penny. Until things even out, she's told. They won't. You try not to panic. You focus on your work. You shape the dough with extra care. You clean harder. You even polish the display jars, though they haven't been touched since spring. And one afternoon, in a bold move no one sees coming, you attempt your own version of a sweet bun. You mix flour, sugar, and the tiniest drop of milk. Then on impulse, you shred a little dried orange peel into the dough. It's all you've got. You roll it, bake it, and hide it at the back of the oven to avoid scrutiny. When it comes out, it's ugly, but it smells incredible. Citrus and crust mingling in a way that makes your stomach growl. You try one. It's not bad, not perfect, but it's different. You leave 2 on the cooling rack and walk away. Later, you notice they're gone. No one says anything, but the next day the journeyman asks if you've got any more of that peel. You say no, and he mutters, "Shame," then walks off. That night you sleep with the faintest smile under your soot-smudged cheek. Of course, a couple of good buns won't save the business. The master knows that, and by week's end he does something unthinkable. He lowers prices. Just a bit. A half penny here, a full penny there. Enough to hurt, not enough to stop the bleeding. He also commissions a new sign. It's plain pine, painted black, with the bakery's name in white block letters. It's not flashy, but it's visible. On a good day, the fog clears enough for people to read it from across the street. Here's your fringe fact for the day. Some competitive bakers in Victorian England resorted to spreading rumours about their rivals to lure customers back. Things like, he puts sawdust in the crust, or she bakes with lard made from dead cats. No joke. Entire businesses lived or died on neighbourhood gossip, so you're not exactly shocked when the scullery boy mumbles, "I heard that shiny bakery boils their buns in tallow." You don't know if it's true, but the way the journeyman nods and whispers it to the next customer tells you the rumour's already grown legs. Still, you feel it, the pressure. The way every tray you carry now feels a little heavier. How every loaf's crust is a test. How your hands shake more than they used to. The master's not yelling as much, but the silence is worse. It's heavy. It clings to the rafters. Even the oven seems moodier, fluctuating more, like it knows the stakes have changed. And you wonder, as you scrape burnt crumbs from the baking sheet at the end of the day, if you're still making bread or fighting a war. You barely sleep anymore, not just because of the early hours and late-night scrubbing, but because your dreams are starting to smell like scorched flour and overproofed dough. You wake up gagging on phantom soot, the image of lopsided loaves haunting you like ghosts of bakes gone wrong. And today brings a fresh nightmare into your waking world, the gas oven. You hear the news at breakfast, or what passes for it, half a crust soaked in yesterday's tea. The master is hunched over the ledger with a frown so deep it could hide an entire village. He doesn't look up when he says it, just mumbles, "They're installing the gas oven next week." You freeze mid-chew. So does the journeyman. Even the scullery girl stops scrubbing. The room tilts for a second. "Gas," someone whispers. The master nods, finally lifting his head. His eyes are bloodshot. "The coal's costing too much and it's too slow. We can't keep up." You don't say anything, but inside your chest buzzes with a strange mix of panic and curiosity. A gas oven? That's like bringing a carriage to a foot race. Everyone's heard of them, gleaming, efficient monsters that bake with a consistent flame and no soot. No coal to shovel, no embers to manage. Just a twist of the valve and boom, heat on demand. It sounds magical. It also sounds like the end of everything you know. By midday, talk of the oven has swallowed the bakery whole. The journeyman calls it a metal demon and mutters about lazy fire. The master seems defensive, irritated by the suspicion in the air. He orders everyone to clean more, Move faster, prep twice as much dough, as if proving he doesn't need the upgrade even while making room for it. You're stuck in the middle, wondering what your job will even be once the coal oven goes cold. There's a strange loyalty to the old ways here, even among the soot burns and the wheezing lungs. The oven is unreliable, yes, but it's yours. You've learned its mood swings, its tantrums. You've faced its open mouth at 4 a.m. and survived. It's a rite of passage. And now, all of that might be tossed aside for a machine that doesn't even hiss when it's angry. Still, part of you is curious. You think about what it might mean: less heat, less smoke, fewer burns on your arms. Maybe you won't cough up black phlegm every night. Maybe the bread will come out even, golden, not scorched in some spots and underdone in others. Maybe you'll have time to breathe. But then again, maybe it means fewer hands needed in the kitchen. Maybe it means apprentices like you will get the boot because a gas oven doesn't need tending. It doesn't need charm or instinct, it just works. And that thought sticks in your throat like underbaked crust. Historically, the introduction of gas ovens in the mid-19th century changed baking dramatically. They allowed for mass production, faster output, cleaner workspaces, but they also marked the beginning of the industrial creep into craftsmanship. Baking stopped being entirely tactile and became more mechanical, more uniform. Progress, sure, but at what cost? That evening, a man arrives at the back door with blueprints. His coat is too clean, his boots barely dusty. He nods to the master and unrolls the plans on the flour-streaked bench, like the fire won't absorb the stains. You hover nearby, pretending to scrub while you eavesdrop. Words like installation, pipes, ventilation, and safety valve float through the air. The master just grunts, arms folded, eyes tight. At one point he snaps, "Where am I supposed to put the proving trays now?" The man answers calmly, pointing to a corner where you currently keep the lard tins. You wince. There's no good place for anything anymore. After he leaves, the bakery feels different, quieter. The oven still burns, but it's like it knows. It glows low, sullen. The fire is dying in more ways than one. Later that night, while shaping a batch of wholemeal loaves, the journeyman surprises you. "You ever smelled gas?" he asks, not looking up. You shake your head. "You'll know if it leaks, smells like rotten eggs and bad decisions." He chuckles dryly, then coughs into his sleeve. You glance over and realise his hands are trembling. He's afraid too. The debate among scholars here is rich. Some argue that gas ovens saved bakeries by keeping them competitive. Others say they mark the death of skill, of gut instinct, of heat handled by feel instead of dial. You're not sure who's right. But you know one thing: you're about to be caught between eras, like a man trying to bake with one foot in the future and one stuck in soot. The scullery girl, surprisingly, is excited. "No more ash buckets," she whispers. "No more coal dust in my tea." You nod because she's not wrong, but you can't share her joy. You glance at the old oven, its iron doors scorched and familiar, the bricks stained with years of effort. You know its heat. You've bled on its stone. That oven is pain, yes, but it's also pride. And now you'll have to learn something new all over again. The next morning you come down early and stand in front of the oven. No one's up yet, just you and the fire. You kneel, open the hatch, and watch the embers dance one last time. You think about every burn, every loaf, every curse and compliment that came from this roaring mouth. You breathe it in: ash, smoke, old bread and sweat. Then you close the door and whisper, "Don't explode when they gut you." You're not sure if it's a goodbye or a threat, probably both. You don't mean to inhale half the powdered sugar in London. It just happens. One minute you're leaning over the prep bench, brushing egg wash onto a tray of misshapen buns, and the next you're choking on a swirling cloud of fine white dust. It gets in your throat, your nose, your eyes, even your ears somehow, and suddenly your lungs feel like a sponge that's been dipped in sweetened cement. You stagger back, coughing, while the scullery girl howls with laughter. The powdered sugar tin sits smugly on the shelf, lid half-cocked, daring you to come back for more. Welcome to pastry day. The master doesn't trust you with cakes yet, too delicate, too temperamental. But today he's short on help, and the master's wife is pacing in the front room muttering about an upcoming tea order for the mayor's wife, which means someone's got to prep the puff pastry, sugar buns, and almond biscuits. That's someone? Unfortunately, it's you. You start with the sugar buns, something between a roll and a rebellion. The dough is richer than bread, eggy and slick, refusing to behave like anything familiar. You roll it out, cut it into rough spirals and let it rise under a cloth. Then comes the syrup, sugar, water and just a whisper of vinegar. You boil it too long the first time and nearly scorch the pot. The second time it works. You brush the buns in syrup, dust them with sugar and set them aside. That's when the trouble starts. Powdered sugar in the Victorian bakery is nothing like the soft, gentle stuff you sift over pancakes in a modern kitchen. This sugar has sharp edges. It's been pounded by hand in a mortar and pushed through a wire sieve until it's technically fine enough to use, but still aggressive on your skin. You dump it into the sifter with all the grace of a drunk ferret and bam! A mushroom cloud of sugar explodes upward. You cough, blink, your eyelashes stick together. It's in your mouth. You now taste like a pastry. The journeyman, who's been shaping pastry cases across the room, turns and glares. "Trying to kill us all," he mutters, eyes squinting through the haze. "Careful with that stuff." You mumble an apology through a sugar-crusted throat and try again, slower this time. You finish dusting the buns, barely resisting the urge to sneeze. As they go into the oven, you wonder if you'll ever fully exhale without tasting molasses again. Here's a curious bit of trivia. Victorian pastries weren't always meant to be eaten fresh. Many were designed to last, sometimes for days or even weeks. The sugar wasn't just for sweetness, it acted as a preservative. Almond biscuits could sit in tins for months without going stale, and sponge cakes were often doused in brandy or rum, not for flavour alone, but to fight mould and stretch shelf life. You're not baking for pleasure here. You're baking for endurance. After the sugar buns are done, the master steps in and assigns you something new. Eccles cakes. You freeze. You've never made them before. He sees your hesitation and says, "It's just dough, fruit and sugar. Don't overthink it." You nod, unsure. The filling's a sticky mess of currants, brown sugar, and a pinch of spice pressed into rounds of flaky dough. You seal them shut, brush with egg, and cut a cross on top. A few burst open while baking, oozing dark syrup onto the tray like pastry crime scenes. Still, you get a grudging "not bad" from the journeyman when they cool. The shop smells amazing now, not like bread, like sweetness, warmth, butter and indulgence. A scent that makes people stop outside, sniff the air and peer through the window. By late afternoon, the master's wife is packaging a dozen assorted buns and biscuits into a woven hamper with a handwritten note. "For her ladyship," she mutters, "and may she choke on a cherry pit." You pretend not to hear. You're tasked with organising the day's extra pastries for sale, arranging them on trays, placing the best-looking ones near the front, the slightly burnt ones in the shadowed corners. Presentation matters more than flavour, especially when the mayor's housekeeper might wander in and point to something without tasting it first. That's the thing about Victorian pastry culture. It's performative. The fancy items are a class badge, something to display on fine china at tea, while pretending not to care that the sponge cake cost more than your week's wages. Bread is survival, pastry is ambition. The scholarly debate here is rich, no pun intended. Some historians argue that pastries in the Victorian era became tools of social theatre, made to impress, not to nourish. Others point to cookbooks of the time and insist they were still about domestic pride and tradition. You've read neither, but you've seen the faces of customers who order a sugared bun and leave without eating it. It's not for hunger, it's for status. You mop the floury floor while the scullery girl scrapes burnt sugar from a pan, her hair stuck to her forehead in stiff little spikes. "That French place ain't got Eccles cakes," she says, as if it's a battle cry. You smile. She's not wrong. For all their fancy glass and golden lettering, the rival bakery hasn't figured out how to make something simple, sticky, and emotionally devastating like a proper British fruit-laden pastry. And yet, you feel the pressure. You notice the extra effort the master's wife puts into wrapping the parcels now. You see the master testing new ingredients, cloves, orange peel, even rose water in one experimental batch. He's adapting. He's not saying it out loud, but he's fighting to keep the bakery relevant. And you're starting to feel that fight in your own bones. Here's a fringe fact. Some Victorians believed sugar was a stimulant that made people more irritable and prone to excitable nerves. You wouldn't argue with that right now. Your head's pounding. You've had 4 tastes of syrupy buns in the last hour. Quality control, you tell yourself, and you're buzzing like a lanternfly. Your hands won't stop twitching. Your vision has the faintest sugar haze around the edges. And yet you keep baking. By evening, the last of the pastries are boxed and sold, the ovens cool, the scent of sweet dough lingers in your clothes. Your apron is stiff with sugar, your sleeves sticky, and your hair holds a fine coating of powdered white that makes you look prematurely grey. You sink into the back bench, sipping water that tastes faintly like almond. The scullery girl steals the last bun. You let her. Tomorrow it'll be back to bread, to coal or gas or whatever mixture of soot and routine defines the day, but for now you've survived pastry duty. Barely. You're scrubbing out a sticky tray of burned syrup when you hear it. That unmistakable voice, shrill, tiny, and far too self-assured for someone with dirt under every fingernail. You're doing it wrong, the child says. You pause, slowly turn your head, and there he is again. Arthur. 9 years old, possibly made entirely of spite and vinegar. Arthur's been working here longer than you, despite his age. No one really remembers when he started. He just arrived one day, dragged in by a church warden or maybe a second cousin of the master's wife, and was handed a mop and a warning. Since then he's made himself at home, scowling his way through chores with the judgmental energy of a retired general. You force a smile and keep scrubbing. Arthur hops up beside you with the kind of speed that implies extra knees. "That's not how the master does it," he says, pointing at the tray. "You've left sugar along the edge. You'll get ants." His voice is flat, factual, like he's announcing your impending failure as if it were already written into history. You resist the urge to say something unkind and instead hand him the cloth. "Why don't you show me then?" Arthur snatches it like you've insulted his honour and gets to work. And annoyingly, he's right. He gets the sticky corners clean in 2 seconds flat. You glare at the back of his head. He has the hair of someone who's never once worn a hat properly. Arthur isn't the only child here. There are 2 others. Tom, who mostly moves flour sacks and doesn't speak unless cornered, and Elsie, the scullery girl who may or may not be your superior depending on the task. But Arthur's a different breed. He has opinions, he quotes the master like scripture, and worst of all, he bakes. Not just helps, bakes. You once caught him making the morning rolls with the journeyman, his hands covered in dough, forehead smeared with flour like a battle scar. The master didn't stop him. In fact, he nodded when Arthur formed the rolls and said, "Good spacing." You nearly dropped a tray in shock. Here's the brutal truth. Victorian child labour wasn't just accepted, it was expected. Kids like Arthur didn't go to school unless someone paid for it, and no one paid. They were sent to work as soon as their hands were strong enough to carry a broom or pull a tray from the fire. In bakeries, they cleaned, fetched water, folded cloth, and sometimes, yes, made bread. There were no laws protecting them, no minimum wage, just long hours and constant pressure to keep up with adults twice their size. Arthur, to his credit, or eternal annoyance, does more than keep up. He outpaces you at nearly everything. He's faster, smaller, able to duck under counters and balance 3 trays on one arm. His hands move with purpose. His eyes miss nothing. And if you make a mistake, he'll tell you loudly. But today, for some reason, he's sticking by your side. He helps you finish the tray, then grabs another, this time already knowing where the burnt jam is worst. "Journeyman says you still hold the peel wrong," he says offhandedly as he scrubs. You don't respond. He says you tilt it like a farmer. You keep scrubbing. Then, "You ever make your own sponge?" You blink. Sponge? As in sponge cake? No, of course not. You barely get to make brown bread, let alone the soft, delicate stuff reserved for the master's experiments. You shake your head. Arthur shrugs. "I have. Once." He says it like it was no big deal, but his chest puffs slightly. "Didn't fall in the middle or nothing." You hate him a little and admire him a lot. That afternoon, Arthur is assigned to deliveries, and you breathe easier with the kitchen to yourself. But something nags at you. You find yourself checking his station, rewrapping the cloth on the proving tray like he does, folding the parchment tighter, spacing the loaves more carefully. You mimic his little tricks, and annoyingly they work. Later the journeyman grunts, "Finally got your corners clean." You nod, say nothing. Somewhere in the back of your head you hear Arthur's voice. You'll get ants. You curse him, quietly and with reverence. Here's a fringe bit of knowledge. Some bakers believe children had an advantage in baking because of their light touch. Older bakers with stiff joints and thick fingers could overwork delicate pastries or damage the proof of a sponge. Kids had nimble fingers and endless energy, 2 things you're rapidly losing. As evening sets in, Arthur returns from deliveries with soot on his collar and a single slice of sponge cake wrapped in wax paper. "From the tea house," he says, casually tossing it on the bench. "Said they liked our Eccles. Traded." You stare at the slice. It's barely bigger than a playing card, but the sponge is golden, the icing perfectly smooth. You each take half and eat in silence. For a second, you're just two tired bakers sharing a stolen taste of something finer. Then Arthur licks the last crumb from his finger and says, "Still better than your buns." And with that, the moment is gone. You don't tell the master, but the next day you try folding your dough like Arthur does. One gentle twist, a press, a tuck. The loaves come out rounder, the crust bakes cleaner. Even the journeyman doesn't complain. There's a bitter, unspoken truth here. Children like Arthur are born into the bakehouse and will likely die in one. If he's lucky, he'll become a journeyman. Maybe one day a master. But the odds aren't great. A cough that lingers, a bad burn, a poorly timed accident with the slicer, and it's over. No safety nets, no sick days, just disappearance. But for now, he's still here. Still smug, still faster than you. And somehow he's starting to teach you more than anyone else. It starts with fog, like so many mornings do in this city, thick and yellow-grey, clinging to the buildings like a second layer of soot. But this fog is worse, heavier, the kind that turns your skin damp the second you step outside and makes the gas lamps glow like smudged fireflies lost in a bowl of porridge. London's famous for it, this ghost smoke air. But today it doesn't feel atmospheric. It feels like a warning. You're running deliveries, sack slung over your shoulder, bread still warm and leaking heat through the coarse cloth. Your boots slap wet cobblestones, slipping now and then on unseen slick patches where mud meets something you really hope is just mud. Every breath you take burns slightly, like the air's been seasoned with chimney ash. You duck your head and keep going. The first stop is the corner tobacconist. You knock, hand over 2 brown loaves, and collect a coin warm from the shopkeeper's palm. You don't linger. No one does. Everyone's coughing. Everyone's eyes are watering. The city feels like it's slowly drowning in its own breath. By the second delivery, your throat is raw. You tie a rag over your mouth like you've seen the journeyman do in particularly smoky weather. It helps a little, but not much. The fog is everywhere, curling through alleyways, sneaking through shutters, seeping into sleeves and soaking hems. You glance up once and can't even see the tops of the buildings, just the endless press of low cloud and smoke, turning the world into a grainy watercolour. And this is the moment you realise you're baking for ghosts today. Victorian London's famous for its London particular, a fog so dense and foul-smelling it became a character in its own right. Caused by coal smoke, factory exhaust, chimney ash, and damp air from the Thames, it would settle over the city for days, sometimes weeks. Bakers hated it, not just because it choked you mid-delivery, but because it crept into everything. Dampened your flour, clung to your loaves, made even the freshest bun taste slightly like a fireplace. You stop outside the postmaster's house and knock twice. No answer. You knock again. Still nothing. The fog muffles sound, swallows your voice. Finally, a creak. Door opens a few inches. A hand reaches out, takes the bread and vanishes again. You hear coughing behind the door before it closes, a raspy, endless kind of cough that makes your stomach tighten. You head back with only 2 loaves left. One for the schoolmaster, one for the widow near the canal, but you pause near the bridge, sack still on your shoulder, trying to make out the road. Everything's just blur. Shapes of people, maybe. Or maybe posts. You can't tell. Your eyes sting. Your chest feels like someone lit a match behind your ribs. Someone stumbles past you, muttering, eyes down, scarf tight across their nose. A delivery boy from another shop, maybe. His apron's darker than yours, cleaner, but his boots are caked in the same muck. You nod. He doesn't look back. By the time you return to the bakery, your fingers are numb. Your apron is soaked from the knees down. The master sees your face and says, "Wash up, then help with the tea loaves." No sympathy, no comment on the smog, just routine. The only thing more relentless than the fog is the bread schedule. You scrub in the wash basin, scalding your hands on hot water that smells faintly of lye. The journeyman hands you a towel, then a bowl of soaked raisins. Drain these, not with your mouth. He's trying to be funny. It's not working. You can't stop coughing. Inside the shop, the windows are steamed up from the oven heat, but outside the fog remains thick as ever. Customers come in coughing, red-eyed, scarves drawn over their faces. One man takes his bread without a word, shoving coins into the master's wife's hand and turning back into the street like he's diving underwater. The bakery feels like a lifeboat. Hot, noisy, slightly cruel, but it's dry. And still the loaves must be delivered. You go back out again. This time to the tea shop near Clerkenwell Green. The order is larger, 6 loaves, 4 sponge cakes, 2 dozen scones. Arthur insists on carrying half. You hesitate. He's 9 and barely taller than the basket, but he's already got his scarf on, eyes narrowed, boots tied tight. "I've done worse," he says. "You seen the smokehouse down by Borough? This is perfume." You set off, walking side by side, disappearing into the murky swirl. You lose sight of him 3 times and have to whistle. He whistles back like a street urchin version of a canary. You both laugh, and the sound gets swallowed by the air. By the time you arrive, you're soaked again. The woman at the tea shop looks horrified at your condition, but takes the goods without complaint. She offers you each a coin and a dry cloth. Arthur accepts both. You don't. You just nod, already wanting to be back inside. On the way home, Arthur points out the bakery's chimney before you even see it. There. Smell the yeast? You do, barely. Beneath the soot and smoke, the warm scent of bread wafts through the fog like a signal flare. You follow it. That night, you sit near the oven just to dry your boots. The master doesn't object. No one does. Everyone's silent, exhausted. The fog presses against the windows like a second wall. You can barely see the street. Here's a strange fact. During the Great London Fog of 1873, some bakeries closed entirely, not because they couldn't bake, but because customers couldn't find the door. You believe it. The fog has swallowed your world whole. You lie down in the storeroom back against the flour sacks, apron still damp. Your lungs still burn, your fingers still ache. But the smell of rising dough is all around you, familiar, strong, like something that still works, even when everything else feels like it's unravelling. You close your eyes and picture the loaves cooling on the racks. You imagine them lined up in the window. You imagine someone biting into one and tasting for just a second something other than student smoke. You're elbow deep in pastry trimmings when the master's wife claps her hands once, sharply, and announces, "We need 6 Victoria sponges, 2 Battenbergs, and as many fairy cakes as your idiot hands can manage by Sunday." There's a pause, the kind that holds weight, for the vicar's wife and the mayor's mother and Lady Billinghurst. You freeze mid-fold, hands coated in sticky crumbs and lard. You glance over at the journeyman, who's slicing neat rounds of shortbread with all the urgency of a man cutting his last will and testament. He doesn't react to the announcement, which means this has already been discussed behind doors that you never get to stand behind. The scullery girl swears under her breath. Arthur, for once, is quiet. It's tea season, that strange sacred ritual of the upper classes where biscuits are never just biscuits, and the height of your sponge cake might as well reflect the weight of your influence. You've seen it before, how customers don't ask for cake, they declare it. They give lists with toppings and glazes, like they're commissioning a portrait, not ordering food. And everything must be just so, no cracks, no sunken centres, no flour streaks. Crumbs should never be visible, frosting must not drip, and heaven forbid you use the wrong jam. You'll put on fairy cakes, which sounds simple enough. Tiny sponge rounds with icing and, if there's time, candied peel or slivered almonds. But they're more delicate than anything you've handled. One crack in the sponge and it's a failure. Too much icing and it's ruined. Not enough? Dry. The master demonstrates by making one in silence, hands quick and practiced. He doesn't speak, but he does give you the look, the one that means you have 2 tries before he pulls you off cakes entirely and sends you back to flour sack duty. You start mixing the batter slowly, carefully, folding instead of beating, watching the texture shift from lumpy to silken. It's oddly satisfying, less brute force than bread, more like coaxing the mixture into agreeing with you. You portion the batter into greased tins, measuring each with your eyes, trusting your gut. Then you place them in the oven, hold your breath, and wait. The fairy cakes bake beautifully, light even, golden with the faint dome on top. You nearly tear one in half just to smell the inside, but you don't. You cool them carefully, then begin the icing, sugar, milk, lemon juice, whisked to a glaze and poured in thin layers. You make 24, 14 look acceptable, 5 are good, 3 are perfect. The master nods at the best of them, then tells you to Do that again, only with double the batch. And you do. You're starting to feel like you might be good at this. Then comes the Battenberg. You'd heard of it, but never seen one up close until today. A fancy little rectangle with perfect pink and yellow sponge blocks tucked inside a marzipan shell, like a sugary checkerboard in a pastry coat. The journeyman handles the sponge. Your job is marzipan. You roll it out on the sugared bench, arms aching, trying to keep the thickness uniform. Too thin and it tears. Too thick and it overpowers the sponge. The master inspects your first wrap. He runs one finger along the seam, then raises an eyebrow. Try again. You do. 3 more times. You finally get it right. Here's the strange truth about Victorian tea treats. They're less about hunger and more about precision. The afternoon tea table is a battlefield of social nuance. The cakes aren't meant to satisfy. They're meant to be admired, judged, and delicately nibbled with 2 fingers and a look of disinterest. The cleaner the lines, the finer the frosting, the higher your status. No one cares if it tastes good. They care if it looks expensive. Scholars love to argue whether this explosion of elaborate baking was about cultural pride or oppressive domestic expectations. Were tea cakes an expression of creativity, or just a symbol of social pressure? You think about that as you ice your 6th Victoria sponge. You're sweating, exhausted, and the batter is sticking to everything except the pan. You can't decide if this is art or servitude. Arthur's helping with scone prep. He cuts them with frightening precision, making sure each round is exactly the same size. If they lean in the oven, he says, Lady Billinghurst will send a note. You want to laugh, but you know he's right. She once sent a loaf back for being too enthusiastic, whatever that meant. At one point, a tin of glacé cherries falls off the shelf and spills across the floor. You drop to your knees to help clean up. Arthur watches you with mild disgust. Don't eat one, he says. They taste like lies. You agree and keep sweeping. The oven becomes your best friend and worst enemy. You rotate trays constantly, checking browning, testing sponge with a wooden skewer. One batch of fairy cakes overbakes by 2 minutes. You hide them. One sponge collapses slightly in the centre. You flip it and pretend it was meant to be layered. You've never worked this carefully. You've never had to. Bread forgives. It expands, cracks, and settles into its own skin. But cakes? Cakes keep score. And right now, you're just trying to break even. Here's your quirky fringe fact for the night. Some upper-class Victorians hired dedicated pastry chefs just to handle tea cakes and sugarwork. They'd create spun sugar decorations, edible lace, even miniature candied birds to perch on the rim of cake platters. All for a meal meant to last half an hour and end with polite nods. It's possible more creativity went into those tables than most modern art exhibits. By the time Sunday arrives, you've filled 4 hampers. Sponge cakes stacked like fragile bricks, scones wrapped in cloth to keep them warm, biscuits layered in tins. The fairy cakes are tied with ribbon, in little boxes so delicate they might blow away in a breeze. The master's wife inspects every package like she's choosing weapons for a duel. The master stands by the door, jaw tight. If this goes wrong, he mutters, we'll be feeding rats by Christmas. You want to say something reassuring, but you can't. He's not wrong. Arthur and the scullery girl carry the hampers. You and the journeyman follow with trays of extras. You deliver them like sacred offerings to a temple that's never once acknowledged your existence. The vicar's maid sniffs at the Battenberg. Lady Billinghurst's footman actually weighs a fairy cake in his palm before accepting it. You hold your breath the whole time. When you return to the bakery, there's a silence. Then the master nods, once. That's all. And suddenly you feel it. Pride. Not just relief. Real, uncut pride. You made something that mattered. That night you eat a leftover scone with your fingers, hunched on the bakery step, the air full of sugar and dusk. For once, you don't feel like an apprentice. You feel like a baker. You're rolling out biscuit dough in the dim morning light when the bell over the shop door rings, not with the usual soft jingle of a customer, but with the sharp clatter of authority. Everyone freezes. The scullery girl drops a spoon. Arthur ducks behind a flour sack with the instincts of someone who's learned early that nothing good ever comes from a surprise visit. The master doesn't look up. He just mutters, "Inspector." And then he appears. Bowler hat, stiff collar, black coat that seems to soak up light. Sanitary Commission. The man who determines whether your bakery is fit for human consumption or one rat tail away from being shut down. His shoes don't even creak as he walks in, but his gaze creaks for him, dragging over every shelf, every tray, every darkened corner, like a judgment made flesh. "Surprise inspection," he says. "Nothing personal." "Of course not. It's never personal when they dig through your livelihood with a stick." You stand still, hands covered in dough, trying not to breathe too loudly. The inspector walks slowly around the shop, tapping the counter, peering into baskets, sniffing near the display scones like they might confess something. The master finally emerges from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a cloth, nodding curtly. "You'll find us in order." The inspector replies, already lifting a tray of brown loaves and examining the bottoms. He sniffs them. He breaks one open and pokes the crumb. Then the dreaded question, "What flour do you use?" The master gestures toward the sacks by the door, mixed from Ashton's mill, and rye from the co-op down near the docks. The inspector walks over and tugs at the cloth cover. His finger dips into the flour and comes up holding a small lump. He rolls it between his fingers. You feel your heart thud once hard. You're suddenly very aware of every questionable ingredient that's passed through this kitchen in the last 2 months. Chalk, sawdust, spoiled rye that got dried near the oven and used anyway. You imagine every dirty corner the inspector might lean into next. Your mouth is dry. Your lungs feel too big for your chest. The inspector grunts again and moves on. He enters the back room. You hear his footsteps, deliberate, measured, echoing. You want to call out and warn him about the loose floorboard that hides the beetle trap, but you stay silent. The master follows him inside. The door swings shut behind them. Here's something no one tells you. In Victorian bakeries, inspections were terrifying, not because they might uncover something unexpected, but because they might expose something necessary. Everyone cuts corners. Everyone bends a rule or two just to keep the shelves full and the prices tolerable. The inspector isn't really looking for perfection. He's looking for a reason to fine you, or shut you down, or make an example of your little soot-stained shop. The journeyman leans toward you, voice low. Last time they shut down Tilsbury's over an eel they found in the proving box. Nobody knows how it got there. You blink at him. An eel. Big one, he says, then goes back to shaping loaves like this is perfectly normal. The inspector returns 10 minutes later with the master close behind, his face hard but unreadable. Your oven's old, the inspector says. Very old. Still works, the master replies. The inspector scratches something into a small book with a stubby pencil. Crumbs good, ventilation poor, flour acceptable, proofing room tight but clean. There's a pause. Everyone waits. The scullery girl bites her lip. Finally, the inspector tucks his book into his coat and says, "I'll be recommending continued operation, but we'll revisit in the spring. You'll want to improve drainage in the back alley, and consider sealing your flour barrels." The master nods. Of course. Then the inspector turns and leaves, just as quietly as he arrived. The door swings closed. The bell jingles once, gently, like an afterthought. Everyone exhales at once. Arthur crawls out from behind the flour sack and says, he smelled like cough drops and punishment. You laugh, and it's the first sound of genuine relief in the bakery all day. Here's a weird historical wrinkle. Some health inspectors in the 19th century weren't scientists or doctors at all, just retired military men or city bureaucrats with enough connections to be handed a clipboard. Some took their duties seriously, exposing horrific conditions. Others were less about hygiene and more about enforcing the unspoken hierarchy of the city, shutting down immigrant-owned shops or working-class bakeries that dared to sell fancy goods. It was a lottery, not a system. Today you got lucky. The master doesn't speak for a while. He just returns to the mixing bench, starts on the rye dough like nothing happened. You don't press him. You clean the counters and pretend your hands aren't still shaking. Later, the journeyman mutters, "He didn't notice the cracked tile in the storeroom." You nod. Or the mouse hole behind the bag hooks. "Maybe he's getting soft," he says. "Maybe he's saving it for next time." Because that's the thing, there's always a next time. You spend the rest of the day baking in a weird sort of suspended animation, like the air hasn't returned to normal. The master is sharper than usual, snapping instructions like a drill sergeant. The scullery girl drops a tray and gets her first real scolding in weeks. Arthur is too quiet. Even the oven seems twitchy. burning hotter on the left side, throwing ash where it usually stays tame. But by evening, things begin to settle. The trays come out clean, the loaves rise right. The shop smells like butter and yeast and something resembling peace. And when the last customer leaves, the master says, without turning around, "You handled yourself." You glance up. "Me?" He nods once. "Didn't panic, didn't speak. Good lad." It's not exactly a compliment, but it's not nothing. You clean the last counter, wipe down the scales, and step outside for a breath of air that doesn't reek of sugar and nerves. The sky's clear now, fog's lifted. You see stars. The inspector might return in spring, he might find the cracked tile, he might see the flour barrel hasn't been sealed, he might shut you down. But not today. Today the bakery survived, and so did you. There's a part of the bakery no one talks about, not because it's forbidden exactly, but because it's avoided. It's the cellar under the rear storeroom, behind the flour bins and under the loose tile the inspector thankfully missed. The master never mentions it. The journeyman won't go near it. Even Arthur calls it the bad stairs. And when Arthur calls something bad, you take it seriously. So naturally you're sent down there. It starts when the master tells you to fetch the last sack of winter flour. "It's in the lower cellar," he says, not looking up from his kneading. You pause. "The lower one?" He nods. No explanation, no torch. Just points. You grab the lantern and a burlap sack, force your legs to move and find the trapdoor. The air changes the moment you lift it. The bakery always smells like flour and smoke, maybe a hint of sweat. But down here, it's cold, damp, sweet in a wrong way, mildew and something faintly meaty. You try not to think about it. You step down into the dark. The stairs creak with each step, the kind of creak that sounds less like wood and more like breath. The lantern flickers against stone walls that sweat even when it hasn't rained. Your boots hit the bottom with a wet thud. You're in. The cellar's low and wide, lined with sagging shelves and crates that haven't been touched in years. Old bottles of vinegar, a sack of salt that's hardened into a boulder, a stack of mold-flecked parchment labels curled like dead leaves. You walk carefully, eyes scanning for anything resembling flour. Your lantern casts long shadows, and at one point you're sure you see something move in the corner, but when you turn, it's just a hanging cloth swaying gently. You find the flour sack eventually, tucked in the far corner, nearly buried beneath crates of dried lentils and a broken butter churn. The sack is thick with dust, the top tied with twine that flakes as you touch it. You pull it free and it groans like a reluctant ghost. You don't look inside, not yet. You just heft it onto your shoulder, nearly toppling backward under the weight, and make your way back upstairs. Faster this time, taking the stairs 2 at a time, slamming the trapdoor shut behind you and trying to forget how it sounded when it closed. Back in the kitchen, the journeyman glances at the sack. "That's the wartime stuff," he says. "Kept it since the shortages." You raise an eyebrow. "It's safe, right?" He shrugs. "Depends on your definition." You open the sack, peel back the inner cloth. The flour is darker than usual, off-white, almost greyish. Smells musty, faintly metallic. You've baked with worse. You add it to the mix, slow and cautious, folding it into the sponge base for the next round of wholemeal. You don't tell the master. You don't need to. Here's a grim but true historical tidbit. During grain shortages in wartime or during poor harvests, bakeries often dipped into emergency flour stores. Old batches blended with ground legumes, potato starch, even sawdust if desperation really sank in. Some flour was stored for years, salted and smoked to keep pests out. But that didn't always stop the decay. Still, if it baked, it was sold. The dough behaves strangely. Not badly, just different, more elastic. It clings to your hands like it doesn't want to let go. The journeyman adds more water. The master sprinkles in salt and doesn't say a word. The dough rises slowly, unevenly, like it's figuring itself out. You shape it anyway. You bake it anyway, because you still have to. The finished loaves are denser, crusts darker. Not burnt, but deeper in hue, somewhere between mahogany and overconfidence. When sliced, the crumb is tighter, almost glossy. The flavour? Odd. Not unpleasant, but earthy, with a bitterness that lingers on the tongue. Arthur tries a bite and says, "Tastes like a library." You don't know what that means, but he's not wrong. Customers don't complain, though. Some even like it. "Heartier," one says. "Feels proper," another remarks, clutching a brown, round and gloved fingers. The master nods slightly and tells you to use the rest of the wartime sack. We'll call it rustic. But not all the cellar discoveries are so useful. Later in the week, the scullery girl comes upstairs, pale and shaking. She'd gone down for vinegar and came back with a sealed tin wrapped in wax paper. "It moved," she whispers. The master unseals it, frowns, and tosses it in the ash bucket. No one asks what was inside. Do you volunteer to clean the cellar the next day? Maybe it's curiosity. Maybe it's that strange itch of unfinished business. You take the lantern and a broom, descend once again into the cold. There's a corner you didn't reach last time. A wall of stacked crates, behind which you find a door, small, warped, and barely visible in the dark. It's not locked. You pull it open. Inside is a room the size of a wardrobe, walls lined with hooks and empty shelves. On one shelf sits a single wooden box labelled tallow for crusts. You open it. Inside are jars of pale fatter, each sealed with wax dated years ago. One has a dead spider sealed in with the fat. You close it, you move on. There's a small ledger on a nail near the door, a log of inventory long disused. You flip through the pages, flour, eggs, barm deliveries, entries about lost loaves and mouse incursions. Then something else. A line scratched into the margin. Do not use top barrel, smells of damp. You check. It's still there, still closed. You leave it that way. Back in the bakery, no one asks what you saw, but the journeyman gives you a small nod of respect and the master hands you a slice of buttered toast without comment. It's good. The bitterness of the wartime flour is mellowed by the butter, the crust crisp, the inside still warm. That night, you dream of the cellar again, of flour sacks stacked like coffins and jars that breathe when you're not looking. But you wake with your fingers twitching, already folding dough in your mind, and somehow it feels like progress. Not all the secrets of the bakery are pretty, but some still feed you. Sundays used to be quiet, not restful, don't get that idea, but quiet, at least. A shorter bake, fewer loaves, the occasional order for an afternoon tea. The bakery could breathe just for a moment, but not today. Today it's chaos, it's noise and elbows and heat, like a brass band in a chimney. And the cause? Church. That's the thing about Sundays in Victorian London. They don't start when the sun rises, they start when the bells ring. All across the city, from cathedral towers to corner chapels, the bells call out like alarm clocks designed by angels with boundary issues, and when they do, the entire population puts on its best hat, shuffles out the door and marches toward forgiveness. And after forgiveness, they want bread, not just any bread. Sunday bread, which means it has to be fresh, warm, golden, and absolutely perfect. People who haven't bought from you all week will show up demanding a sixpenny white loaf like they've never purchased anything less in their lives. They want currant buns, scones, pudding rolls, tea cakes, and if you don't have them, they'll look at you like you're the one who committed original sin. You're in the back kitchen before dawn, wiping sleep from your eyes as the master rattles off the day's prep like a general listing has fallen. 3 dozen scones, 10 white loaves, 2 trays of Eccles, cinnamon rolls if there's time. He doesn't ask if you've had breakfast, he assumes you haven't, and hopes it makes you work faster. The dough is already rising by the time you put on your apron. You get to work dividing it, shaping it, rolling it into buns with mechanical precision. The scullery girl is spooning sugar into tea cake moulds like her hands have no nerves left. Arthur is on deliveries. He'll return in time to help serve if he doesn't get trampled first. The journeyman's focused, quiet, almost reverent. He doesn't speak unless absolutely necessary. His fingers fly across the counter, folding dough, brushing glaze, cutting slits into loaves with the practiced flick of a man who could do it blindfolded. You try to match his pace. You fail. By 7:30 the shop is already humming. You hear the bells tolling in the distance, rising through the fog like some holy warning. Customers are already lining up by the time the master swings open the front door and flips the wooden open sign. And then it begins. The first wave is polite. Women in bonnets, men in polished shoes, all asking for the usual. 1 white, 1 brown, a half-dozen biscuits, maybe a slice of fruit loaf if it's not too stale. But then the church lets out. They come in waves. A river of hats and shawls and heavy coats, all funneled through the tiny shop like they have been released from purgatory, and this is the only exit. Some talk. Most don't, most don't. They point, they frown, they elbow their way forward like it's their moral right to demand fresh buns. Children grab at trays. Old men mutter about price increases. One woman insists the jam in her Eccles is too enthusiastic, whatever that means. You're running trays back and forth between the kitchen and the shop so quickly that your legs start to feel like breadsticks. At one point you slide on a patch of flour and nearly introduce your teeth to the stone floor. The master barely glances up. "Watch your step," he says. You want to throw a biscuit at his head. You don't. Arthur finally returns, cheeks red from cold, hair stuck to his forehead. "They're queuing around the corner," he says. You groan. The master says, "Good." By now the bakery smells like every good thing you've ever craved: sugar, butter, fruit, hot bread. The air is thick and golden, despite the cold just beyond the window. But there's no time to enjoy it. You're plating buns, you're wiping down trays, you're answering questions and ducking complaints, and all the while the queue gets longer. Here's a quirky little fact. Victorian churches actually helped fuel the Sunday bread craze. Families would often fast before services, meaning they left church ravenous. Combine that with the expectation of a respectable Sunday meal, and you've got half the city descending on its local bakery like locusts in waistcoats. Some bakers even prepped extra just for the post-church rush, knowing it could make or break their week's profits. You're told to slice a fruit loaf for display. You do, and immediately regret it. The smell is intoxicating. Dried currants, lemon peel, a hint of clove. You sneak a sliver when no one's looking. It's chewy, warm, and briefly makes the whole morning worth it. Briefly. The shop bell rings again. Another family enters, this one with 4 children, and the look of people who take tea very seriously. The mother points at the last scone on the tray. A man behind her points at the same time. A standoff ensues. You step back, unsure if you should intervene or build a wall between them. The master's wife steps in and gives the scone to the children. No explanation, no apology. The man mutters something vile under his breath and leaves. She doesn't flinch. By midday the trays are emptying. You're scraping together the last few buns, trying to make the display look full. The master begins pulling day-olds from the back and reheating them slightly for resale. You're tasked with brushing them with syrup to make them look fresh. "They won't know," he says. "They'll be chewing with their pride." And it's true. No one complains, no one even blinks. Here's something historians like to debate. Was the Victorian obsession with bread about hunger or identity? Was it comfort? Was it fear of looking poor? Or was it just ritual? Some say Sunday bread wasn't about food. It was about being seen with something warm and respectable in your basket. You suspect it's all of those, and also possibly insanity. When the rush finally dies down, you slump against the back wall, apron smeared with jam, hair dusted with flour, arms trembling from 1,000 tasks. The scullery girl drops beside you, eyes closed, lips moving silently. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. The master walks through, surveying the wreckage. He gives a quiet grunt. Good turnout. The journeyman lights a pipe and says, "No riots this time." Arthur appears with a biscuit in one hand and a broom in the other. "We're out of everything." You nod. "Even energy." And he says, "That too." By sunset, the shop is quiet again. The bell doesn't ring, the air cools. You mop the floors, count the coins, and box up the crumbs for tomorrow's soup. You've never been so tired, but you've also never felt so necessary, because for one loud, frantic day, you helped feed a city that refuses to stop. If you'd asked someone in your neighbourhood what makes a good baker, they'd likely say something about crust or crumb, the kind of answer that comes easy to people who've never watched their fingers go numb over a lump of dough. But if you ask the upper crust, the literal pastry aristocracy, they'd mention something else entirely. Elegance, subtlety, and above all, tea service. Today you learn the difference between feeding people and pleasing them. It starts with a bell. Not your usual shop bell, but the thin tinkling sound of the front door being opened by someone with a very expensive glove. You glance up from folding a towel to see a woman in a full-length wool cloak, a veiled hat, and a feather pinned with something that catches the light like polished silver. You think she's about to ask for a loaf. Instead, she announces she's placing a special order. "Her ladyship is entertaining guests," she says to the master's wife, who straightens like she's just seen royalty. You edge closer to hear. 6 types of baked goods, minimum, all individually wrapped. No duplicates, no dry edges. A variety of textures, she adds, and flavours, nothing overly spiced. Subtlety, you understand. The master's wife nods like this is completely normal. Of course, by Friday, Wednesday. The woman offers a business card with a flourish, then departs in a cloud of lavender and judgment. The kitchen goes still for a moment. Then the master calls you by name. "Get the marzipan." You blink. "What?" "Marzipan. Ground almonds, sugar, rose water. We're making fancies." And so it begins. The upper classes don't want bread. They want entertainment. Their pastries need to whisper, a hint of clove, a breath of citrus. Nothing bold, nothing that announces itself with a punch of molasses or a smear of currants. These people don't eat. They sample, they dissect with pastry forks, placing half a crumb on their tongues like it's a performance. And every bite must match their expectations of class, elegance, and whatever fashionable obsession is currently sweeping the parlours of Mayfair. You spend the day rolling out thin sheets of almond paste, cutting tiny stars and flowers from dyed sugar dough, brushing the tops of miniature tea cakes with apricot glaze so thin you have to squint to see it shine. You learn to pipe cream with the gentleness of a surgeon, and the paranoia of someone who knows their icing can make or break a social occasion you'll never be invited to. The journeyman handles the sponges, delicate, moist, not too sweet. The master does the lemon biscuits himself. You're trusted with the Viennese swirls, which must be piped in perfect spirals and topped with a sliver of candied orange. Your first tray comes out lopsided. The second earns a grunt. The third, miraculously, passes inspection. Arthur, of course, is thriving. He's been given the tiny tart shells to fill, raspberry jam in one, custard in another. "They'll want variety," he says, like he was born reciting royal menus. You want to hate him, but then he hands you a spoonful of leftover jam and says, "Try this. Tastes like summer in a church pew." He's right. Here's your historical fact of the day. Victorian tea parties were more than just meals, they were status rituals. Women used them to display wealth without appearing vulgar, inviting professionals to admire their new china while nibbling on delicacies served by the slice. Pastries weren't just snacks, they were statements. How a cake looked mattered as much, sometimes more, than how it tasted. Some hostesses even had special forks for each type of sweet. God forbid you use the wrong one for a macaron. The order must be delivered in a box lined with fresh paper, divided by flavour, sealed with a satin ribbon. You and Arthur are tasked with arranging it all. It's like playing pastry chess. Every colour has to balance, every texture spaced apart. Too much brown and it looks rustic, too much pink and it looks juvenile. You try a little of everything, then shift it around again. Finally, the master steps in and makes 3 adjustments you didn't even notice, then declares it tolerable, which is probably the highest praise he's given this week. The delivery is sent by hand. Arthur, in a clean apron, hair slicked down with water, and a death glare from the scullery girl. He returns 2 hours later with the ribbon and a folded note. It reads, "Exquisite, especially the lemon." The bakery erupts into something very close to celebration. The master doesn't smile, but he does not scowl for an entire 15 minutes. The journeyman puffs his pipe and says, "She'll be back." The master's wife reads the note twice before pinning it to the wall with a clean tack. You make more the next day, not for a client, just to keep up appearances. You practice your swirls, your tarts, your sugar flowers. At one point you make a tiny almond cake with too much rosewater and nearly choke on the perfume. Arthur laughs so hard he drops a whole tray of jam fingers and has to mop the floor. You feel strangely proud, not just because the pastries came out well, but because you're doing something you never thought you'd care about. Creating for the sake of beauty. Bread fills, belly stins. These fill expectations, and occasionally even joy. Here's a fringe fact that makes you pause. In some of the fancier households, pastries were not just eaten, they were named. Ladies would invent titles for their new cakes. Duchess Drops, Queen's Kiss, Moonlight Puffs. You once thought food was either good or bad, now you know it can be theatrical. By evening you've cleaned the piping tips, folded the parchment, and stored the last of the extra cakes in a tin marked "fragile hands off." Arthur already ate 2 and claims innocence. You wash your hands and look at the tips of your fingers. They're crusted with almond paste and dyed sugar. You used to come home reeking of yeast and ash. Now for once you smell like something delicate. And for reasons you can't explain, you like it. Christmas doesn't creep into the bakery, it barges in, trailing soot and holly, elbowing its way past the proving trays and declaring, "Make room." One day you're kneading rye dough in peace, and the next the master's wife is shouting about orders for figgy pudding. The window's full of pine branches tied with red ribbon. And there's a handwritten sign promising hot cross buns, even though it's not technically Easter. "They'll buy them anyway," she says, waving a sugar-encrusted spoon like a weapon. And she's right. They do. Because it's Victorian Christmas, and that means people will eat anything soaked in brandy, rolled in suet, or baked with fruit that's seen more port than daylight. You wake up earlier than usual now, long before the fog lifts. The first job of the day isn't bread, it's plum pudding, which, fun fact, contains 0 plums. Not one. Instead, it's a dark, dense meteor of dried raisins, currants, orange peel, suet, breadcrumbs, flour, spices, eggs, and a flood of booze that could sterilize surgical instruments. You mix it all in a deep ceramic bowl, stirring clockwise. Always clockwise. Arthur tells you it's tradition. If you stir the other way, you doom the house. He says this with such grim seriousness that you believe him. The dough clings to your fingers like tar. It's not mixed. It's word is summoned. You press it into pudding basins, tie them off with cloth, and lower them into boiling pots where they'll steam for hours, hissing like kettles of fury. You wipe your brow with your sleeve and catch a whiff of brandy that lingers on your skin all day, like a ghost with a festive drinking problem. From there, the tasks spiral into chaos. Mince pies, not meat, thank heavens. Fruit mince, with apples, dates, and enough spice to knock out a pharmacist. You roll out crusts until your wrists ache, fill them by the spoonful and crimp each one like it's being prepared for the Queen's table. Then comes the sugar. Everything must be sugared. Buns, biscuits, the tips of your fingers, your eyebrows, no surface is safe. The oven's working overtime. There's no space, no pause. Trays go in, trays come out, and if you blink, your next batch is already burning. The master takes over the main oven, moving like he's at war with time itself. You and Arthur are demoted to the smaller iron oven in the back, the one that sometimes sputters and smokes and takes personal offence to sponge cakes. You learn to whisper to it, bribe it with a few extra seconds of heat. Pray. The scullery girl strings cranberries for the front window, muttering curses under her breath each time the needle slips. The journeyman is knee-deep in gingerbread dough, cutting men and stars and something vaguely reindeer-shaped from thick, sticky slabs. You decorate some of them, trying not to smear the icing with your sleeve. Your snowflakes come out uneven. Arthur calls them sad frost. You threaten to ice his boots. Here's a delightful little historical detail. Victorian Christmas was when bakeries made their real money. Even the poorest families scraped together coins for a special loaf or a single sweet bun. The middle class ordered extravagant cakes. Fruitcake laced with rum, iced with sugar stiff enough to break teeth. The rich sent out gift hampers stuffed with spiced biscuits, candied fruit, sugar mice, and entire puddings wrapped in cloth like edible cannonballs. You've started working by candlelight just to keep up with the demand. You don't even notice when the master stops checking your work. 1 minute he's criticising your shaping technique, and the next he's just letting you bake, trusting your hands. You're shaping shortbread now with a rhythm that's become second nature. Flatten, slice, fork the top, bake until golden. They come out crisp, delicate. You line them on a tray like soldiers going to battle. Customers queue out the door. Some arrive in groups, gloved and red-nosed, breath fogging the windows as they press against the glass. Inside, the shop glows gold, candlelight bouncing off tin trays, sugar sparkling under the lamps, warmth spilling out with each open door. You see faces light up as they leave with wrapped loaves and brown paper parcels, steam curling from the tops of warm buns. Then someone places an unusual order. The master hands it to you. "Royal plum cake," he says, voice flat. "For the bishop's niece. She's sending someone around Tuesday." You nod like this is normal. It isn't. The royal plum cake is something else. The ingredients list alone reads like a fairy tale. Preserved ginger, orange zest, blanched almonds, cloves, cardamom, molasses, cinnamon, brandy, and 13 different dried fruits. Arthur offers to help. You say, "No, this one's yours." You mix it in silence. The dough's heavy, fragrant, almost regal in weight. You press it into a deep tin, smooth the top, and bake it slow, steady, careful. When it comes out, it's a masterpiece, glossy, spiced, domed just right. You brush it with a syrup of clove and citrus, then wrap it in parchment and tie it with a blue ribbon. Arthur sneaks a finger of syrup, Tastes like royalty got punched in the nose. You beam. There's a debate among food historians about whether Victorian Christmas baking was more about religious ritual or middle-class performance. Were the cakes and puddings part of Christian tradition? Or were they stage props for a growing consumer society desperate to prove it could celebrate properly? You don't know, but you do know this. You've never seen people so grateful, so lit up by sugar and spice and the illusion of abundance. By the end of the week, you've baked enough fruitcake to sink a barge. Your apron is permanently sticky. Your fingers are dusted with cinnamon. You can't smell brandy without blinking. But still, you keep going. The master's wife begins sending you out with the nicer orders. She says you've got the right look, whatever that means. You walk to townhouses and drop off bundles of carefully packed fancies. You smile, you nod, you pretend not to care when the maids barely look at you. You're there to deliver sweetness, not expect thanks. On Christmas Eve, as the last bun goes into the oven, the master pours each of you a tin cup of mulled wine, even Arthur, even the scullery girl. You all stand in the kitchen, sweaty and flour-streaked, and aching but warm. To the fire, the master says, raising his cup. To the bread, adds the journeyman. Arthur smirks. To the brandy. You smile, raise yours. To the sugar. And for one brief moment, you're not just surviving, you're celebrating. It starts with the newspapers, crinkled, ink-smudged, barely legible sheets pinned to boards or fluttering under the arms of men who don't usually read anything more complicated than a price tag. But today they're staring, muttering, pointing at headlines like they might leap off the page and start biting people. One reads, Wheat harvest fails in the north. Another, flour prices expected to double. And just like that, you know, the bakery is about to be in trouble. You arrive to find the master already grim-faced, counting coins with the desperation of someone trying to find an extra shilling by sheer will. The journeyman is silent. Even Arthur, usually smug and impossible before breakfast, just says, We're not getting fresh sacks this week. It's the wheat, of course. A rainy season, flooded fields, fungus, locusts in some places, shipments delayed, no imports on the docks, and no one to blame really, just bad weather and worse luck, which doesn't matter to the customers, because they still want bread, and they don't care what it takes to make it. You haul the last sack of flour into the storeroom and watch the dust swirl in the air like it's evaporating before your eyes. It's not enough. You all know it. The master says nothing, but his eyes flick to the emergency ledger, the one used only in wartime and famine. It's not wartime, not exactly, but it might as well be. Soon, everything's smaller. The loaves are tighter, shorter, baked into longer shapes to trick the eye. The master tells you to add more water to the mix, more salt. Use milk if there's any left over from deliveries. You add mashed potato to some batches, breadcrumbs from stale loaves to others. It's not fraud, not yet. It's survival. Then come the angry customers. They notice immediately. They always do. One man says the crust is thin, another says the centre's gummy. A woman taps the bottom of a loaf like it's a bad melon and declares, This isn't your usual white. The master stands behind the counter like a stone monument and says, There's a shortage. That's all. No apologies. No excuses. The woman buys it anyway. Because what else is she going to do? Soon the prices go up. Not dramatically at first, just a halfpenny here, a farthing there. But you see the difference in the eyes of the customers. Suspicion, resentment, fear. The poorer ones stop coming altogether. The well-off buy in bulk. You see them leaving with 3-4 loaves wrapped in cloth, eyes darting left and right like they're making off with treasure. Here's a grim historical note. During real flour shortages in Victorian Britain, bread riots weren't uncommon. Entire neighbourhoods would swarm bakeries, demanding price cuts or free loaves. Sometimes bakers gave in. Sometimes they were dragged into the street. You think about this as you watch a growing knot of people forming outside your window, muttering and under their breath. You work faster now, the ovens don't stop. You and Arthur take turns sleeping in shifts, laying down on flour sacks and waking to the sound of tin trays and boiling kettles. The scullery girl burns her hand on a sugar pot and doesn't even flinch. You wrap her hand in cloth and she says, Still better than starving. Even the master's voice starts to fray. One morning he curses at the ledger and slams the pen down so hard it snaps in half. The journeyman says nothing, just quietly sweeps the ink drops off the bench and continues shaping loaves with fingers that look like they've been sculpted from ash. You start using barley, cornmeal, rice stretched so thin it weeps. You bake loaves that feel like ballast stones. The smell is different now, less yeasty, more earthy. Like old grain sacks stored too long in the damp, you add spices where you can to mask it. Clove, nutmeg, a whisper of molasses. People don't always notice, but you do. One morning, the bakery window is smashed. Just a rock. No one was hurt, but the message is clear. People are angry, not at you exactly, but at the hunger, at the scarcity, at the way the world feels tighter and smaller every day. The master boards up the broken pane and says nothing. No police report, no complaint, just a sigh. The next day he posts a sign, "Limit 2 loaves per customer." It lasts 6 hours. By noon, a man has shoved another customer, a child's crying, and the scullery girl is threatening to throw hot water on anyone who touches the tray before she says so. It's chaos, and it's only getting worse. Arthur disappears mid-morning and returns with 3 flour sacks slung over his back, panting like a racehorse and covered in river mud. "Found a cart stuck down by the docks," he says between breaths. "Told them we were owed it." You have no idea if that's true. You don't ask. The master gives him a single nod and says, "Mix a batch. That flour is darker, coarser. It smells like the Thames, but it bakes, and right now that's enough." There's a rumour going around that the bakery across town was shut down last night. Not because of riots, because they simply ran out, locked the doors, hung a sign that said closed until further notice and never came back. You wonder what happened to the apprentices. The bread, the last loaves on the rack. The bakery is quieter now, fewer customers, but the ones who come in, they come in desperate. A woman trades a wool scarf for a tin of shortbread. A man offers 2 eggs from his own chickens. The master accepts both, no questions, no change. Here's a fringe fact. In some neighbourhoods during Victorian food shortages, bakeries turned into informal barter houses. Bread for labour, bread for goods, bread for secrets. You've seen it now firsthand. A crusty round as currency, a slice of sponge as the closest thing to grace. By the end of the week you're exhausted. Your hands are raw, your nails stained. You fall asleep on your bench and wake up with crumbs in your hair and a half-formed loaf on the counter. But you're still here. The shop still opens, the ovens still burn, the flour is low, the lines are long, and the world feels like it's closing in, but still the bakery survives. And that means, for one more day, so do you. It's a quiet Wednesday morning, fog pressing on the glass, ovens humming low, the bread just beginning to rise when she walks in. You don't see her at first. The bell doesn't ring, the door doesn't slam, she just appears, in the kind of silence only money can buy. She's tall but not towering, wrapped in a dark blue travelling cloak, gloves neat, boots polished to a dull shine. Not the sort of woman you usually see this side of the bakery window. She doesn't speak right away, just scans the shelves like she's memorising them. Then her eyes land on the fruit loaf. Your fruit loaf. The one you'd brushed with honey and dusted with nutmeg that morning. "That one," she says softly. You blink. "Whole loaf?" "Yes, and 2 buns." Arthur peers in from the back room, instantly suspicious. The journeyman straightens his collar. The master, for once, walks to the counter himself. She pays with coins you barely recognise, shiny, heavy, fresh from a different kind of pocket. "Keep the change," she murmurs, voice as smooth as buttered tea. Then she glides back toward the door. But before she leaves, she turns just for a moment and says, "Your crust is better than the kitchens at Windsor." The door swings shut. She's gone. There's a beat of silence. The master exhales. "Who was that?" Arthur grins. Rumour is she's one of the Queen's chambermaids. The scullery girl gasps so hard she drops a tray of biscuit ends. You're still frozen. Not because you believe her, but because something about that woman didn't belong to this street, or this part of town, or even this century somehow. She moved like someone who spent her life in rooms where things were handed to her, never needed with floured hands. A chambermaid. That's the rumour anyway. Maybe the Queen's, maybe not. But someone close, someone who has tasted palace food and still came here. Word spreads before the day is out. By nightfall, half the block has heard the story. By morning, it's doubled. Someone swears they saw her carriage, black lacquer, gold trim, parked just down the alley. Another insists she spoke perfect French while ordering. Arthur, of course, claims she complimented his folding technique. "Said my bun was royal," he says, deadpan. You roll your eyes and keep shaping dough. But the story keeps growing. Customers come in asking, is this the bread the Queen's maid bought? and the master doesn't confirm it, but he doesn't deny it either. He gives that little shrug that maybe not twitch of the shoulders that says, "We're not saying anything, but yes, absolutely." And it works. Sales bump overnight. People order the royal loaf without irony. They want what she had. They want to taste the crust that supposedly impressed someone who lives 2 doors down from Queen Victoria herself. The fruit loaf becomes your signature. You're baking 3 times as many now, brushing each with care, slicing the edges with delicate flicks. You start adding orange zest to the mix, just enough to feel indulgent. The journeyman grumbles, "You think she'll be back?" You don't answer, but you hope so. Here's your historical nugget. Queen Victoria had a famously sweet tooth. Her kitchens were staffed with pastry chefs, sugar sculptors, and bakers trained in the French tradition. But even still, there were rumours that palace staff sometimes preferred outside goods, local bakeries, little shops tucked away on side streets. Too much ceremony in palace food, one former butler supposedly said. Sometimes you just want a proper crust. That week, you polish your fruit loaf technique until it sings. The sugar caramelizes just slightly at the top. The crumb is tender but firm enough to slice. The fruit's evenly distributed, no sinking to the bottom. You start serving warm slices to early customers, just to show it off. They eat in silence, eyes fluttering shut for a second longer than necessary. You feel proud, genuinely proud. Then one night she returns. No fanfare, no carriage, just the door creaking quietly and the faint jingle of her gloves as she walks in. The same cloak, the same voice. "I'm hosting guests this Sunday. Would you be able to prepare a tray?" The master's wife steps in. "Certainly. What sort of items?" She doesn't hesitate. The fruit loaf, the currant buns, and that almond biscuit, if the young one made them. Her eyes meet yours. You nearly drop the brush you're holding. Arthur is grinning like a fox. "Royal approval," he whispers. You spend the next 2 days building the tray like it's an offering to the gods. Every loaf is inspected, every biscuit weighed. The journeyman even irons the linen under the pastries before wrapping it all. You polish the wooden tray, tie the ribbon, wipe your hands 6 times before placing the final cover. She sends a driver to collect it, a man in a button coat who nods once and says nothing. When the tray leaves the bakery, it feels like sending off your own child. You hover near the front window the rest of the day, just in case she reappears. She doesn't, but the stories keep coming. By Friday, someone claims she was seen at the opera. Someone else says she attended a garden party with Lord B. No one remembers which lord, but they say it confidently. The legend is alive. And your hands, your fruit loaf, they are now part of the narrative. The bakery becomes that bakery. And you become something more than an apprentice. For once, your work isn't invisible. People come in asking for your bakes. They say your name. They smile when they bite into your loaves. It's not fame, it's not fortune, but it's recognition. And in this world, in the bakery, that's rarer than royal visitors. You've stopped keeping track of the days. The sun never rises properly now, just sort of lifts the fog a little. And your hours have blurred into each other like batter on a too-hot griddle. Morning starts when someone kicks your boots and ends when your arms give out. Lately, you don't even see the front door. You're on night baking duty now. Sounds mysterious, right? Like some elite shift for master bakers with secret knowledge and flour-dusted spells. But really, it's what happens when demand outpaces sanity and someone needs to make dough while the city sleeps. That someone now is you. It begins at midnight, when the ovens have cooled just enough to not melt your eyebrows. The master is gone, asleep upstairs with a ledger balanced on his chest. The scullery girl curled on a flour sack, Arthur tucked under the table like a stray cat. Only you and the journeyman remain, moving like ghosts in the warm glow of the hearth. Night baking is a different world. No customers, no noise, just the crackle of the fire, the whisper of the proving cloth as you lift it, the gentle sigh of dough as it exhales in its final rise. The silence is oppressive at first. Every creak of the bench, every shuffle of your boots echoes like a dropped pot. But eventually it becomes calming, meditative, like the world has been turned down to a simmer. The journeyman doesn't talk much. He doesn't need to. His hands speak in movements, and yours learn to answer. He nods once to the rye dough, you fold it. Taps the fruit buns, you portion them. He gestures to the milk pan, you stir just before it boils over. Instructions, just rhythm. Your body adapts in strange ways. You eat dinner at 10 p.m, sleep from sunrise to mid-afternoon, and wake groggy and hungry for hot bread. You dream of kneading, Your fingers twitch in your sleep. Your eyes grow accustomed to the amber glow of lanterns and the orange burn of coal light. The outside world slips away. You forget what the sky looks like before noon. One night, around 3 a.m, you realise your fingertips have gone completely numb. You try to flex them. Nothing, just dull pressure and the memory of motion. The journeyman notices and grunts. "Milk scald," he says. "Cold wash, then keep moving." So you do. You plunge your hands into the wash basin until the water bites your skin, then dry them on your apron and get back to work. Because the dough is ready. Because the oven's at peak heat. Because people are going to want bread before you even remember your own name. Here's a historical fact to chew on. Many Victorian bakers worked through the night so bread could be on the shelves at dawn. Customers expected fresh loaves with their breakfast, and heaven forbid a bakery open late. In fact, some city councils even fined bakers who weren't ready to serve at sunrise. Sleep was optional. Blistered hands were not. There's something eerie about baking in the hours no one else claims. You feel like a time traveller, slipping between centuries, feeding a city that hasn't noticed you yet. Outside you hear the rattle of a lone carriage, the bark of a dog, the soft hiss of mist against brick. Sometimes you think you hear voices, but they vanish before you can place them. Around 4, the rats start to stir. You hear them scratching behind the walls, skittering near the storeroom. The journeyman keeps a stick by the proving baskets. He doesn't use it often, but it's there, just in case. You try not to think about the flour sacks stacked too close to the floor. By 5, your hands are sore and sticky, and smell like sugar, yeast, and faint panic. The oven's red hot, the air thick with the scent of baking fruit buns. You and the journeyman move like clockwork, one shaping, one baking, one brushing glaze, while the other rolls dough for the next batch. You don't speak, you don't need to. Then the light changes. It's subtle at first. A softening of the shadows, a faint bluish tint to the window fog. And suddenly, it's morning. The world returns. The spell breaks, you feel your exhaustion again. Your limbs ache like they've been carved from dough. The scullery girl stumbles downstairs, yawning, and muttering something about tea. Arthur appears 10 minutes later, still half asleep, brushing his hair with one hand and stealing a warm bun with the other. The master arrives last, inspecting the trays like he's just inherited a fortune. He nods once. Good crust. High praise. You want to sleep, desperately. But first you clean, always clean. Sweep the ash, wipe the benches, stack the cooling racks. The bakery has to look untouched by night, even though you lived a whole life in it while the rest of the street slept. You stagger upstairs and collapse onto your cot. Your pillow smells like flour. Your fingers curl involuntarily. You close your eyes and the bakery is still there, behind your eyelids. Golden light, soft crackling, the hum of proofed dough rising under linen. Here's a strange fringe detail. Some bakers became so accustomed to night work they developed what doctors called baker's delirium. Hallucinations, disorientation, lost time. You're not there yet, but you understand how it could happen. Time has no rules here. Only bread does. You sleep like the dead, dreamless, heavy. When you wake, it's evening again. You eat a slice of yesterday's crust, drink weak tea, and feel the ache settle into your spine like it's building a home there. Then you tie your apron, and begin again, because the night is waiting, and the dough won't fold itself. You're halfway through folding a batch of coarse barley dough, because flour is still scarce and barley's the only thing you've got in decent supply, when it hits you. The smell. Not the usual warm yeasty comfort or the burnt sugar sting of overbaked buns. No, this is different. Sharp. Oily. Bitter. It wraps around your head like a wet scarf and makes your stomach twist. Something's wrong, you say aloud, though no one's near enough to hear. The master's upstairs, Arthur's gone off to the mill to beg for another half-sack of rye, and the scullery girl's taken the day to visit her sister in Spitalfields. It's just you and the journeyman, and he's outside wrestling with the ash barrel, so it's quiet. Too quiet. You set the dough aside and sniff the air again. There it is, metallic sour, like old butter left in a hot room. It's coming from the back wall, near the stacked milk crates and the coal bin that no one's cleaned in. Well, probably ever. You move closer. Your boots crunch on something. You look down. Flour? No. Eggshell? No. Dried maggots, dead. Crusted in something that looks suspiciously like melted lard. That's when you notice it. The door to the storage crawl, the one below the stairs that no one opens anymore. The one even the rats seem to avoid. And because your curiosity has officially become a death wish, you open it. It's darker than dark. Your lantern barely reaches inside, casting light like a nervous whisper. You crouch and crawl in, your knees slipping on the damp floorboards, the stink worsening with every foot forward. Finally you reach it, the source, a broken cask of suet fat, long forgotten, leaking. Worse. There's a sack nearby labelled Extra Reserve 1912. You open it and recoil. Inside is flour so grey it's nearly black, riddled with worm husks stinking of mildew. You dry heave and shove it back. Then something else catches your eye. A sealed tin wrapped in wax paper, labelled Barm 1889. Barm, yeast starter. From before you were born, you swear it's moving. You do not open it. You crawl out, gagging, hands coated in grime that clings to your knuckles like regret. The journeyman's returned and sees your face. You found it, didn't you? Found what? He just shrugs. Everyone finds it eventually. You toss the ruined flour, clean what you can, and for the rest of the day you can't stop smelling it. It's in your hair, your clothes, your lungs. You feel haunted. You tell the master. He doesn't even blink. We used that barrel once during the last famine. Put it in the suet pies. Tasted like soap and regret. Never touched it again. Then he turns back to shaping dough like that wasn't the most disturbing sentence you've ever heard. There's an unspoken truth in this place. Every bakery has a corner of horrors. A spot where time stopped. Where desperation left its fingerprints. Where food ceased to be food and became something else. Survival. You just found yours. And now you'll never forget it. Here's a curious historical fact. During hard times in Victorian England, bakers often relied on old preserved ingredients. Not out of tradition, but necessity. Wartime rations included powdered eggs, aged barm, and even fat salvaged from spoiled cuts. If it didn't kill you, it was considered edible. Hygiene was subjective. So was sanity. Later that evening, Arthur returns with a quarter sack of flour and a bottle of something unlabelled and suspicious. Traded it for sugar, he says. Could be vinegar, could be gin. Either way, it'll kill the smell. You splash a little in the mop bucket. It barely helps. You start dreaming of other lives. Quieter ones. Cleaner one. Maybe you're a lamplighter, walking the fogged streets with a pole and a song. Maybe a clockmaker, hands steady and dry, face never crusted with yeast. Or a coal seller, a matchstick girl. Anything where the flour doesn't whisper when you open the sack, and yet you stay. The journeyman tells you about his friend. A baker who left to become a chimney sweep. Better hours, he says. Worse lungs. You laugh harder than you should. But the fantasy clings. Escape. You start to notice the little cracks in your own resolve. The way your back aches more now. The way your fingernails are permanently black-rimmed. No matter how much soap you use. You're 17. Maybe. The bakery ages you. It's hard to tell. Still, there are moments. A bun rises just right. A child presses their nose to the window. The master grunts a rare, well done, and your chest lifts. The crust cracks just the way it's supposed to. The dough peels from the bowl like silk. Tiny victories like crumbs on a starving plate. You wonder if it's enough. Here's a debate among scholars. Why did so many working-class apprentices stay in miserable jobs like this? Was it fear, loyalty, lack of choice? Or did they actually love the craft, despite the abuse and hardship? No one can say, but you get it now, because some nights, standing by the oven with warm bread in your hands, you feel invincible, like you've mastered something ancient, like you belong to a secret order. But other nights, you stare out the bakery window and wonder how far you'd get if you just walked away. Right now, no bag, no boots, just feet and fog and freedom. The answer, of course, is not very far. You don't have money, you don't have skills beyond kneading, folding, sweating and obeying. But you do have a future here. Maybe not a glorious one. Maybe not royal, but steady. Solid. The kind of life that earns a crust. So you scrub your hands, you tie your apron, you go back to the bench, and you bake. You never expected to end up running the place. No one does, really. Not in a bakery like this, where every day is a rolling boil of sweat, crust, soot, and whispered curses. It just happens one day, quiet and inevitable, like the first frost. And by the time you realize you're in charge, You've already been doing the work for weeks. It starts when the master falls ill. Not in a dramatic, clutch the staircase sort of way, just a cough that doesn't go away, a creak in his knees that gets louder, a soft wheeze when he leans over the mixing trough. Just old bones, he says, which might be true, but bones don't sweat through 3 layers of wool and forget how to count loaves. One morning you find him asleep on the proofing bench, dough half mixed, a wet cloth clutched in one hand. That's when the journeyman steps back and says, "Your turn," just like that. And you don't argue, you can't, because the dough is already rising and someone has to pull it from the edge. At first it's clumsy. You bark orders that come out too soft, you mix batches that rise too fast. Arthur forgets the sugar, and you don't catch it until the customers complain. The scullery girl burns the jam, and you nearly cry over wasted fruit. You think the bakery might collapse in on itself, brick by flour-coated brick. But it doesn't. Because muscle remembers, because your hands know more than your head does now, because every failed loaf teaches you what the books never could. You adjust, you learn, you rise. By week's end, the ovens are humming again. The customers don't notice the shift, not really. They still buy, still nod, still complain. But the trays are full and the crusts are clean and no one goes hungry, and that's what matters. The master watches from the stairs now, wrapped in a blanket, a mug of tea clutched tight. He doesn't say much, just nods when you pass. Sometimes he offers a grunt of approval when a loaf lands just right. Sometimes he just sleeps. The journeyman is, well, still the journeyman. But something changes between you. A silent understanding. He stops correcting your shaping technique. He starts asking, "You want the white batch in early?" instead of telling you, "Respect, hard-earned, finally extended." Arthur, of course, adapts immediately. "Been waiting for this," he says, hands on his hips, like he somehow planned your ascent. "I always said you were the future." He did not, but you let him have it. He starts calling you boss in the most irritating way possible. You don't stop him. Here's a historical twist. Many Victorian apprentices, once their masters aged or died, simply inherited the business. No paperwork, no ceremony, just kept going. Sometimes they bought it outright. Sometimes the family handed it over in exchange for care or a promise. The bakery didn't change hands. It grew into them. You wonder if that's what's happening now. The accounts fall to you, the orders, the supplier negotiations. You learn to haggle with millers, to yell at drivers, to bribe the fishmonger's boy with stale rolls to deliver early. You adjust the recipes to stretch what you have, substituting barley when the rye runs low, swapping jam fillings depending on what fruit rots slower. And people notice, not in big ways, but in the way they nod more when they leave, the way they ask for your loaves by name. "You've got a lighter hand," someone says, "more flavour." You don't argue, you just smile. One day a woman asks for you specifically, says she wants your buns. Arthur almost chokes trying not to laugh. You slap the back of his head and thank her with a bow that makes your knees pop. Then comes the Sunday rush. You don't even blink now, you anticipate it. You've got the trays ready, the buns doubled, the sponge cake's already cooled and dusted. The master watches from his stool in the corner, sipping tea and pretending not to tear up when a customer calls the sponge better than last year's. You slip him a slice later. He takes a bite, chews. "You didn't overwhip it," he mutters. You grin. "Learned from the best." Here's your oddball historical bit. In some bakeries, apprentices weren't just trained to bake. They were trained to become. Mannerisms, phrases, even the way they tied their aprons. A lineage passed down like a sourdough starter. You see that now in your stance, your bark, your quiet checking of the oven's glow. You've become the master, not officially, not legally, but no one questions it anymore. You still burn the occasional loaf, still forget the salt on rare sleepless nights, but the bakery runs, the trays fill, the door opens, the bell rings. You find a new rhythm, you start keeping a journal. Notes on recipes, observations about rising times, sketches of ideal crust cracks. No one tells you to, it just feels right, like preserving something sacred. The scullery girl learns to make sponge fingers. Arthur starts shaping with both hands. The journeyman finally teaches you his secret cinnamon ratio. The bakery becomes more than a place. It becomes yours. Not easy, not clean, but honest. Baked into the walls now. And the master? One morning he doesn't come downstairs. The tea goes cold, the blanket sits folded. He's still breathing, but distant. quiet, tired in a way that dough and heat can't fix. You bring him a crusted end of white bread. He eats it slowly, looks at you. Don't forget to grease the tin corners, they catch. You nod. I remember. He smiles. You open the shop that day as usual. You knead, you bake, you sous-sell. The work goes on, but something's changed. You're not surviving anymore. You're leading. And you realize this bakery didn't break you. It built you. The oven is quiet now, just a gentle warmth radiating from the stones, like a sigh after a long day. Outside, the street's gone still. No clatter of horses, no shouts from the grocer's stall, just fog creeping in low and curling around the windows like a cat. You sit at the workbench, your apron heavy with flour, and the scent of the last batch still clinging to your sleeves. The shop is closed, the lamps are low, and for the first time in what feels like centuries, no one is asking you for anything. Your hands rest on the table, calloused, scabbed in places, stained faintly pink from currants. They don't ache as much anymore. Maybe they've simply grown used to it, or maybe they've grown into it, into the rhythm, the ritual, the strange comfort of knowing that even when the world outside frays at the seams, there will always be dough to shape, fire to tend, bread to rise. Looking around, you see the signs of the life you've built. Shelves sagging under tins, parchment folded just so, a butter dish with a crack along one side. Familiar things. You think of the girl who walked in here however many years ago, unsure how to hold a scraper, flinching at the heat, terrified of spoiling a batch. That person is still in you, but so is someone else, someone who stayed, someone who learned, someone who endured. That's the thing about the Victorian bakery, it never stops testing you. The hours are brutal, the air thick with soot and sweat, the customers demanding, the work relentless. But for those who make it through, it offers something most jobs can't, a kind of transformation, a rite, a legacy you can taste. So could you survive working in a Victorian bakery? You already have, and now you get to rest, just for a bit. So slide the stool closer to the fire. Let the last coals crackle and glow. Close your eyes to the rhythm of a place that never truly sleeps. You've earned this stillness. Sweet dreams.